81. Lord Ferolier of the Katu Hill Territory. The morning mist over Katushir Hold had not yet lifted when the East Gate's drawbridge clanged down. One caravan after another poured into the city from the direction of Howling Trail. Mules groaned under bulging burlap sacks of lustrian spices, ore from the dwarf mountains, and silk from the elf forest. Merchants in embroidered brocades urged their beasts onward and smiled at the gate guards. Even a few massive ogres lumbered behind the wagons, hauling crates taller than themselves and gruffly bargaining for an extra jug of ale at the gate. Sunlight gilded the gray-blue bricks of the city walls with a warm gold. 100 guards in gleaming chainmail paced the parapets, hands on longswords, eyes scanning the dense wood beyond the walls. In the arrow slits, crossbows were half-drawn, bronze cannon muzzles aimed into the distance, each barrel embossed with Katushir's griffin. Inside the city, the main thoroughfare thrummed with life. Shops opened early, the smithy rang with hammer strikes, bread scent drifted far from the baker, and jewelry windows flashed with gems that stopped passers-by in their tracks. The streets were a tapestry of races. Dwarf blacksmiths swung hammers and hummed old tunes. Elf merchants bore ornate bird cages with songbirds inside. Human mercenaries embraced courtesans and staggered into taverns. Even a few Gretchens in rough cloth squatted at corners, hawking poisonous mushrooms from the forest. Business was slow for some, but Katushir's rule was clear. Any race could live here so long as it did not cause real trouble. On the second floor of a tavern, several ogres sat at a huge wooden table, shirtless and scarred, clutching ale bowls the size of human heads. When one finished a draught, he roared and the others cheered. A dwarf mercenary, red-faced with drink, slammed the table and argued with an ogre over who could outdrink whom. No one broke a shop or drew a blade. Fighting was tolerated in Katushir, but damaging property was not. Lord Iskaville's guards would see to that. At the heart of the city loomed Griffin Castle. Built of dark gray stones, its turrets pierced the sky, and griffin banners snapped on the spires. 2 squads of armored guards stood at the gate, spears taller than a man, their armor embossed with the griffin. Anyone seeking entrance had to pass 3 strict inspections. Inside the council hall, the mood was grave. A huge wool carpet, its embroidery a map of Katushir's lands, lay in the center. Corps officials sat on stone chairs, the finance officer in purple, the military affairs officer with his medals, the jurist with a law book, and the Lord Steward for the outlying estates. All watched the man in the main seat with serious expressions. Lord Iskaville sat on a tiger-skin-covered stone chair. At about 50, graying at the temples but still vigorous, he had an eagle's gaze. His black robe was trimmed with gold, and a long sword set with rubies hung at his hip, the traditional symbol of Katushir's lords. His fingers tapped the armrest as he looked down at the man in the brocade robe on the floor below. Feluole. By Katushir custom, even the wealthiest merchant without title would stand meekly in a council hall corner. Yet Feluole sat on a chair beside the military affairs officer, cradling a steaming cup of red tea and wearing the composure of a man perfectly at ease in authority. Half a month earlier, he had, before the assembled council, sworn a military vow. He would eradicate the Black Cloth Brotherhood on Howling Trail within a month. At the time, Lord Iskaville had taken it for drunken bravado. How could a mere merchant rout a guild of nearly 1,000 cutthroats entrenched in the swampy Howling Forest? Katushir's troops had tried and failed 3 times. He had humorously promised, if you can wipe out the thieves, the right to manage Howling Trail will be yours, never expecting the boast to be fulfilled. 10 days later, Feluole sent word. The Black Cloth Brotherhood was gone, its leader Kasha missing. Scouts sent by the Military Affairs Office returned with proof. The thieves' camp on the swamp's edge lay emptied, strewn with bodies and signs of looted cannons that had once belonged to greenskins. Caravans were moving again. Merchants told the same odd story. They had met greenskins on the trail, and those greenskins drove off the thieves instead of robbing us. Lord Iskaville now faced a dilemma. Howling Trail was Katushir's lifeline. Caravans along it provided 30% of the city's taxes and linked southern plantations with the northern dwarf mountains. If control of the trail fell to outsiders, Katushir's economy could be choked. A casual promise that had been a joke now bound him. Worse, Felule, a merchant, could not possibly have defeated the Brotherhood alone. The scouts had found greenskin footprints and squig droppings at the thieves' camp, but Catushir's scouts had not believed a greenskin host could reappear so suddenly. 3 years before, dwarf-led forces had swept the forest and left only scattered Gretchens. It seemed likelier that Feluole had the backing of Prince Patton or an imperial mercenary company. Either way, the Lord could not simply hand control of the trail to a merchant. Lord Ascaville broke the silence with a probing tone. Mr. Feluole, you have done Catushir a great service. As Lord, I should honor my promise. But Howling Trail is vital, and you, a merchant. He let the sentence hang. The meaning was clear. You are not qualified to hold that responsibility, and my council will not agree. The military affairs officer chimed in at once. My lord is right. The trail's defenses are a military matter. If a merchant controls it, who will answer if thieves return? The finance officer added, 30% of the taxes come from that route. If an outsider manages it, how can we ensure accounting is honest? Voices rose in opposition. Feluole sipped his tea and smiled faintly. He did not interrupt. He'd expected this. When the objections waned, he set the cup down, stood, and bowed to Lord Iceville. My lord, esteemed counselors, I understand your concerns. Howling Trail is a matter of city safety, and I, as a merchant, do not claim to control it alone. The hall fell quiet. This wasn't the defiant answer many had expected. Lord Iceville's brow tightened. He suspected a trick. Feluole altered his tone and continued crisply. Since I made a military pledge, I cannot allow the Lord's credibility to suffer. I propose a compromise. Speak, the Lord replied. Feluole crossed to the map and pointed. From the east gate to Pine Forest, 20 miles, remain under the Lord's jurisdiction. The army will be responsible for defense and taxation. From Pine Forest to the edge of the swamp, 30 miles, will fall under my management. I will finish rooting out any remaining thieves, secure caravan passage, and remit 30% of the taxes to the city treasury. He paused, then added, My merchant guild will fund a way station by Pine Forest for caravans to rest. The way station's garrison will be troops supplied by the Lord. This ensures the trail's security without compromising the council's responsibilities. What say you, my lord? The proposal was calculated and thoughtful. The core, revenue-rich section stayed under the Lord's control. The more remote, dangerous section went to Feluole, who promised a cut of taxes and would pay to build infrastructure. The officials exchanged relieved looks. Lord Iceville recovered, seeing a way out that preserved his authority and dignity. Very well, he declared. You shall be manager of the southern section of Howling Trail. You will oversee defense and caravan coordination in that section and remit 30% of the taxes to the finance office. The minister will allocate funds to assist with the way station's construction, and the 3rd Legion will provide its defense. Thank you, my lord. Feluole bowed, his smile perfect. The military affairs and finance officers fell silent. Further resistance would be petty. The other officials voiced their assent, and harmony returned to the hall. Iceville studied Feluole, puzzled. Who stood behind this merchant? Feluole had willingly ceded the most valuable portion of the trail. He did so because the power behind him didn't prize those 20 miles, or because they wanted something bigger. Feluole, for his part, knew he was merely an intermediary. The true controllers of the Southern Trail were the Greenskins in Pine Forest. Boss Stone had made the terms clear. Caravans paid tolls, and nobody meddled. The Greenskins did not care about legal management. They cared about whether they could loot and whether they could fight a proper whack. By accepting the southern section, Lord Iceville kept his face and created a convenient, lawful channel for what were in truth greenskin tolls to be recorded. Management fees. Sounded better in the ledgers than tolls extorted by greenskins. After the council cleared, officials filed out and Feluole lingered. Lord Iceville fell into step beside him and lowered his voice. Feluole, tell me honestly, who eradicated the Black Cloth Brotherhood? Feluole smiled, sipped his tea, and answered with easy calm. My lord, some things are better left unknown. You only need to know that Howling Trail will be safe and caravans will come through. That should be enough. Iceville stared for a long moment, then, seeing Feluole would not speak, ceased pressing. He patted the merchant's shoulder and returned to the inner chamber. Whoever stood with Feluole, as long as Catushir prospered, he would for now remain willfully blind. Feluole stepped from Griffin Castle and looked toward Howling Forest. Sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering across the canopy like a golden sea. In that green tangle, a band of allies counted their spoils. The arrangement with Catushir was only the first move in the rise of the Blackrock tribe. The city continued its bustle. Carriage bells, tavern laughter, the smithy's ring, all forming Catushir's prosperous facade. No one knew how tightly the fate of the city had already become entwined with the Greenskin tribe hidden in the forest. Deep in the Howling Forest, the Blackrock tribe's camp was no longer the crude scatter of tents it had been a year ago. The ragged shelters had been replaced by low stone houses with roofs of dried mushroom skins that kept out rain and held in heat. A newly built forge smoked in the center of the Yadu camp, and Ironhold's chimney was twice as tall as last year's, its bellows sounding from dawn until late at night. The mushroom field had tripled in size, huge green caps rising like small umbrellas, while Gretchen pushed carts, harvesting the ripe fungi and delivering them to the nearby brewery. Stone stood before the incubation shed on the camp's east side, cradling a round furball in his arms. The squig cub, prize from the Black Cloth Brotherhood campaign, had grown to half a person's height. Its body was a dense mass of soft green fur, like a giant ball of yarn. Right now it was nuzzling Stone's arm and making affectionate woo-woo noises, exactly like a green-skinned puppy. Stone's gaze was fixed on the giant egg in the center of the shed. The shell was larger than a bucket, its surface patterned in silver gray like armor, and it trembled now. A thin crack had appeared. Crack, crack. Faint sounds came from within. The fissure widened, silver gray flakes slid away, and a pale, light green body emerged. With a sharp pop, the shell burst open. A palm-sized arachnari giant spider wriggled free, its body a jade-green sheen, 8 slender legs flecked with fine hair, and 2 small compound eyes on top of its head. It looked less terrifying than oddly endearing. "It's out! It's out!" a chorus called. Night goblins crowded at the shed's doorway, eyes wide, voices high with excitement. Kes thumped his foot in impatience, nearly dropping the short bow at his hip. If these arachnari could be trained as mounts, the night goblins' fighting strength would at least double. The mature spiders could grow over 5 meters tall, their silk could stop iron arrows, and they could spray paralyzing venom. A proper giant beast unit. Kes pushed his way in, practically vibrating. "Quiet down. Don't scare it," he barked at the others, though his voice betrayed his excitement. He crouched by the little spider and extended a finger. Instead of recoiling, the spider climbed up and perched on his shoulder, rubbing its head against his cheek. Kes beamed and pulled a strip of dried poisonous mushroom from his belt, offering it. The spider bit and ate eagerly. The surrounding night goblins sighed and clamored. "Let me feed it." "Hold it." Stone watched the joyful chaos and couldn't help smiling. A year ago, the Blackrock tribe numbered barely 200 greenskins, poorly armed and hungry. Now the tribe exceeded 1,000, orcs, goblins, night goblins, and more than 20 greenskin slaves sent by Feluole, mostly deserters from other tribes. The camp had expanded tenfold and prospered. It was all tied to control of the Howling Trail, and even more, to Feluole's Golden Rose Merchant Guild. After the Black Cloth Brotherhood's destruction last year, Feluole had kept his word and handed the southern stretch of the Howling Trail to the Blackrock tribe for actual management. The Greenskins didn't need to show themselves. They ran a hidden checkpoint near the pine forest, and when merchant caravans passed the Golden Rose Guild collected the management fees on the tribe's behalf, then distributed the proceeds. Over the past year, the caravans had multiplied, and the tribe had collected 5,000 gold coins just from those fees. More important, Feluole's guild supplied the tribe with materials, thick canvas enough for 2 vests per person, pig iron from the Dwarf Federation's Gezhik that filled Ironhold's warehouses and kept the forges busy, tools, food, even green-skinned slaves. Whatever the tribe needed, Feluole found a way to deliver it. Stone knew, though, that constant dependency was dangerous. Feluole helped because the Blackrock tribe guarded the trail. Once the tribe lost usefulness or Feluole's guild faltered, the arrangement could vanish. Stone had been thinking about a trade product the tribe could claim as its own. something to trade equally with the Golden Rose Guild and create stable income. He had considered mushrooms. The giant green fungi were productive and nutritious, but hard to preserve and transport, and humans and dwarves weren't keen on them. He'd thought about poisoned arrows. The night goblins' toxins were potent, but weapons were risky to sell in quantity and would draw the city lord's suspicion. Then, a few days ago, while drinking the brewery's mushroom wine, an idea struck. Green skin mushroom wine. Made from the tribe's unique giant mushrooms, swamp honey, and forest fruits, brewed through a special fermentation, the wine was high in alcohol, mellow, and distinctly mushroom-scented. Crucially, those mushrooms only grew in their fields, and the brewing process was an art the greenskins had perfected. No other race could imitate it. And the head brewer was Skinny Pole, the tavern's bartender. Skinny Pole was a goblin smaller than most, thin as a chopstick, hence his nickname. He had no fighting skill, but he had a natural gift for brewing. When the brewery opened last year, he'd been a Gretchen carrying casks. Through trial and error, he'd improved the fermentation, and the wine was now twice as good as before. He'd become the brewery's master, personally brewing all the tavern's supply. Furball, let's go to the tavern. Stone stroked the furball and headed for the Green Mushroom Tavern in the camp center. The furball clung to his neck like a pendant and let out two eager woo-woos. The tavern was the liveliest place in the tribe and had been built by stone. Stone brick walls, the largest mushroom skins on the roof, and a crooked sign of green mushroom with Green Mushroom Tavern, carved in Stone's own hand. Inside, green skins sang and laughed. Orc boys thumped great bowls while bellowing the war song. Night goblins chatted about a recent swamp scout, and goblins crowded a table gambling with dice clenched in their teeth. Losers downed bowls of wine, and the room felt like a continual festival. Every greenskin wore a black vest. Stone had ordered them last month from the canvas Felwole supplied. A black bone emblem marked the back. The uniforms not only tidied the tribe's appearance, but oddly increased cohesion. Many refused to take them off, sleeping in their vests. Stone pushed open the tavern door. The singing cut off at once. Every greenskin stood and bowed. "Boss! Sit! Sit down!" Stone waved them off and moved to the bar where Skinny Pole was pouring for an orc. Seeing him, Skinny Pole set the jug down and said with respect, "Boss, you're here. How strong do you want it?" "2 big bowls." Stone smiled and settled on a stool, furball in his arms. Skinny Pole ladled from a barrel into 2 deep wooden bowls, each larger than a human head, and the wine's unique aroma filled the air. Furball sniffed and tutted for a taste. "This batch is getting better all the time." Stone took a sip. The mellow liquid slid down warm and spicy with a faint mushroom tang, far superior to last year's brew. Skinny Pole rubbed his head, pride on his face. "I added more wild honey from the swamp and extended the fermentation. It's sweeter and stronger." When Mr. Felluole's people sampled it last time, 1 bowl was enough to get them drunk. They asked if we could make more, said they'd bring it back for the merchant guild to try. "Really?" Stone's eyes brightened. "Really?" Skinny Pole nodded. "That man said if we could brew it in bulk, they'd buy it at 1 gold coin per barrel." Stone did the math in his head. 1 barrel weighed 50 caddies. At 1 gold per barrel, brewing 20 barrels a day would bring 20 gold a day, 600 a month, more stable than the one-off management fees. And that was a starting price. If the wine's reputation grew, the price could rise. Skinny Pole, start expanding the brewery tomorrow. Stone set his bowl down, tone serious. Find 10 goblins to help. Separate mushroom picking, cleaning, and fermentation. Aim for 30 barrels a day. Quality cannot drop. "I understand." Skinny Pole practically leaped at the chance, his eyes shining. Bigger brewery, bigger name for him in the tribe. Watching Skinny Pole hustle, Stone thought about other needs. Standardized weapons. Over the past year, weapons had improved but remained inconsistent. Orc boys' axes varied between pieces forged in Ironhold and scavenged ones. Night goblin bows mixed hemp and animal sinew strings. Goblin spears were all different lengths. That inconsistency looked messy and made battlefield repairs miserable. Stone planned to have Ironhold forge standardized arms. Orc cleaver axes about half a person's height with 10-inch blades and 3-foot handles. Night goblin short bows with oak limbs and Arachnari silk strings. Now that they had spiders, silk wouldn't be scarce. Goblins would get iron spears with 3-inch heads and 5-foot shafts. Uniform weapons would boost cohesion, ease repairs, and cut forging costs if orc craftsmen could meet the standard. He also needed to train the Arachnari giant spiders into mounts for the night goblins, send Kess to scout the lizardman tribe to learn their true strength again, and find more food to fatten Furball into a future charging beast. Stone sipped his wine and watched the tavern, greenskins singing, laughing, faces lit with happiness. There was still a long road ahead, many tasks to finish, but as long as the tribe stuck with him and development continued, one day the Blackrock tribe would be the strongest force in the Howling Forest. "Boss, a toast." An orc boys lifted a bowl and stepped forward. Others raised theirs, shouting together, "To the boss! Wah!" Stone smiled and clanged his bowl against theirs. Wine splashed onto Furball's fur. The Furball licked at the drops, squinted as if tipsy, and the tavern erupted in laughter. Singing rose louder, bolder. Golden mushroom wine swirled in bowls, green figures moved and danced, and Furball, tucked in Stone's arms, slowly drifted off to sleep. 83. Heading south, on the northwestern edge of the Howling Forest, a thin veil of morning mist lay over Boone Village, tucked into a clearing. Crooked farmhouses lined the dirt road, their roofs thatched and weathered. Thin ribbons of cooking smoke rose from chimneys, mingling with the scent of baked oatcakes and drifting through the fog. Beneath the old oak at the village entrance, a few villagers in patched burlap stooped over bundles of rye. The Empire's tax collectors had passed through 3 days before and taken most of the grain. What remained would barely keep the village until spring. "Hans, are the oatcakes ready? My child's crying," a wrinkled woman called, leaning on a stick. From inside a farmhouse came the sizzle of baking. A bearded man poked his head out, holding a slightly charred oatcake. "Almost. I'll bring it as soon as it's done," he shouted with a grin. By the stream, a handful of barefoot children scrambled in the shallows catching minnows. Their laughter cut through the air like birdsong. Their clothes were thin and worn but clean, faces smudged with mud, eyes alight at the promise of a full meal, oatcakes mixed with wild herbs in another half hour. The people of Boone Village had lived here for generations on fish from the stream, wild herbs, and a few small fields. They never provoked the greenskins in the forest and paid their taxes on time. They wanted only peace, harsh, frugal, but enough to watch their children grow. Then a horn sounded from deep in the trees, long and mournful. "Woo-ow!" The blast cut through the mist like a beast's roar, cold and terrifying. Those gathering rye froze. Hans dropped the oatcake and rushed to the door. The children stopped playing and huddled behind their parents. What is that?" the old woman asked, her voice shaking. No one knew. The sound was not human. It carried only savagery and madness. Thatch and leaves at the forest edge trembled. Dark shapes poured from the mist like a black tide, charging toward the village. They were beastmen. Leading them strode a great horned beast nearly 3 meters tall, goat's head, human torso, its curved horns thicker than water buckets and stained dark. Thick black fur covered its body. A rusty great axe dripped shreds of flesh. Its hooves dug deep hollows in the dirt, each step making the ground shiver. Behind it surged hundreds more. Bull-headed brutes swinging spiked clubs, goat-headed archers with crude longbows and arrows wrapped in dried intestines, and smaller gores, wolfish half-man, half-beast, drooling and clutching sharpened sticks. Mud and blood matted their fur. The stench of rot and sweat hit anyone downwind. "Charge! Take everything! Kill them!" The hornbearer roared. The great horned beast swung its axe at the oak. With a sickening crack, the trunk split. Branches fell, bringing the mist crashing down, and the villagers fled. The beastmen surged into Boone Village like rabid wolves. The Gores were first to reach the fleeing people. Their speed was terrifying. A little girl who lagged was tackled, and the Gore bit her throat. Blood sprayed the thatch. Her mother ran to her only to be struck down by a club. Hans, who had shoved his wife and child into the cellar, turned just in time to see a bull-headed beastman smash into his farmhouse. The club shattered his ribs. He coughed blood and fell. He watched helplessly as the beastman lifted the cellar lid and laughed at his family inside. Hans drove out a last roar. The beastman stamped on his head. Blood and gray matter spattered the farmhouse wall. At the oak, villagers lifted hoes and flailed. The great horned beast slammed its axe and cleaved two men in half. Guts and blood painted the ground. Others tried to run and were struck down by arrows loosed from the tree line, collapsing in spasms. The beastmen tore through homes, ransacking the little food that remained, stuffing stolen grain and oatcakes into pouches, trampling baskets of wild herbs beneath their hooves. They smashed clay pots, drained wells, and snatched infants from mothers' arms, tossing and crushing them with sick indifference. In a corner of a woodshed, a young mother pressed her 1-year-old to her chest, stifling its cries. The door burst open. Two gores padded in, sniffing. One seized the mother by the hair and dragged her out. She scratched and tore at its face. It bit her shoulder and ripped away flesh. Her scream was quickly followed by the other gore's hand on the child's neck. A brutal slam against the wall silenced it. The mother, blinded by grief, sank her teeth into the beast's arm. It brandished a dagger and drove it into her chest again and again until she lay still. The gore kicked her aside and went to pillage elsewhere. By the stream, a group of children crouched behind a rock, watching in terror. They had seen neighbors killed, one split in two, one mother torn to pieces, and they dared not cry. A gore approached, grinning. The children held their breath. Suddenly, a 12-year-old leapt up with a sharpened stick. "Don't come any closer. I'll kill you," he shouted. The gore laughed, plucked him up like a chicken, and bit his face apart. His scream was swallowed by the shouts and roars filling the air. Fires took hold quickly. Thatched roofs ignited, flames running along beams. Thick black smoke rolled up and smeared the sky. The beastmen looted and destroyed. Furniture smashed, walls torn down, and corpses heaped and set alight as they laughed and howled. In the village clearing, the great horned beast stood over smoking ruins, axe dripping and reeking. It threw its head back and roared. The others answered with fanatic cries of chaos and hatred for civilization. Hidden in a cellar, an old woman peered through a crack. Her son had been split in two, her grandson bitten to death, her house in flames. She had no tears left. With a calm, hollow motion, she drew a small pair of scissors from her blouse and drove them into her chest, death on her own terms rather than capture. As the sun rose and the mist burned off, the light fell on a ruined Boone village. Farmhouses smoldered. The ground was littered with bodies, some halved, some gnawed beyond recognition, some blackened to charcoal. The stream ran dark with blood and clotted rags. The beastmen had already vanished into the forest, carrying stolen grain and dragging captives, mostly young women. They left only silence and the ruined husks of homes. Crows landed on the corpses and picked at the flesh, cawing a ragged lament. The wind through the howling forest smelled of blood. No one would know this humble village had once existed here. No one would hear the laughter that had filled its mornings. They had survived on meager meals and peace, and their fate was to be torn apart by the beasts of chaos. The northwestern edge of the howling forest fell quiet again, but the silence was colder than the beastmen's roars. "Beastmen, they have come south!" Dust kicked up across the parade ground in the middle of Yadu. Over 300 orcs stood in 3 crooked lines. The front row were goblin spearmen, their iron spears barely held at shoulder height. The middle row were goblin archers, their bows crooked, some having even strung their strings the wrong way. The back row were orc boys, bulky and strong, but picking at their nails, their iron axes casually discarded at their feet. Stone stood on a high platform at the front, clad in black leather and holding a smoothly polished bone tree staff. Behind him, Furball lay sprawled on the platform. His green fur, half as tall as a person, was flecked with grass clippings. He idly chewed on poisonous mushrooms and let out disapproving little woos as he watched the parade ground below. "All of you, stand proper." Stone's voice rolled across the yard as he brought his staff down on the stone slab of the platform. "Left foot. Step with your left foot. If anyone steps with their right again, I'll have Furball bite their butt." The formation shuddered, and the orcs hastily adjusted. Less than 3 seconds later, a goblin archer stepped with his right foot anyway. Furball sprang up with a whoosh, baring his teeth. The goblin scrambled, hopping to change feet and nearly dropping his bow, which set a few orcs laughing. "What are you laughing at?" Stone glared, and the parade ground immediately fell silent. These orcs had hardened since the fight with the Black Cloth Brotherhood, and a string of smaller skirmishes clearing out thieves. Orc boys could cleave wooden shields with a single blow. Goblin spearmen could pierce pottery jars, and night goblins' poisoned arrows could hit a squirrel at 100 meters. Still, orc sloppiness was in their bones. Getting them into neat lines, or to obey anything more complicated than the simplest orders, was a constant battle. Stone had to fall back on the military basics he'd once known: attention, stand at ease, marching, and a strict carrot and stick system. Whoever marched well got an extra bowl of mushroom wine at noon. Whoever failed weeded the mushroom fields and got no food. Forward, march! They moved in chaotic steps. Some were out of sync, some too fast, some spun in place. A goblin spearman in the front had his foot stepped on by an orc boy behind him, turned to curse and almost threw his spear. A goblin archer's bowstring slackened, and he fumbled, nearly injuring someone beside him. Stop! Stone's head throbbed with irritation as he pointed his staff at the out-of-step orc boy. Glenn, if you go out of step again, you'll be Great Ancient's helper, moving stones for 3 days. Glenn stopped at once, face flushing. Being Great Ancient's helper was worse than weeding. The goblin technicians watched every move, and if you were too slow, they'd whack you with a wrench. He muttered, left, left, and finally took one correct step. Right, just like that. Stone's tone softened. Whoever takes 10 correct steps gets half a piece of roast meat at noon. Interest sparked through the ranks. Orc boys counted teeth gritted, goblins reminded each other, even the most undisciplined straightened their backs. Furball lay on the platform and let out a little giggle. Stone shot him a look, and the green beast promptly buried his head in his fur and pretended to sleep. On the dirt road beside the parade ground, several carts lumbered past, loaded with damp soil for expanding the mushroom fields. Stone watched them and couldn't help a small smile. The expansion of Yadu and Ironhold was going faster than he'd expected. He divided Yadu into 4 districts: east, west, south, and north. The east district was the new workshop area where bathhouses and breweries were going up. The west district was the residential quarter where original tents had been replaced by stone shacks topped with thick mushroom skins. The south district was for training, with the parade ground and a mud pit for building orc boys' strength. The north district held warehouses piled with iron ore and cloth collected from merchant caravans. Ironhold was split into an inner district with forges and armory, and an outer district of goblin technicians' workshops, where Great Ancient and a dozen goblins were hammering out new smithing hammers. In the west district, dozens of orcs were busy building shacks. Orc boys grunted as they hefted heavy beams onto stone walls. Goblins with trowels packed mixed mud into the gaps. Gretchen scurried, carrying stones, handing tools, or lying on the ground using small shovels to clear away rubble. One Gretchen dropped a stone that hit a nearby goblin's foot. The goblin raised his foot to kick, but Bone Tree, supervising, glared him down. The boss said, "No bullying, Gretchen. If you break your foot, who's going to hand you the trowel?" The goblin sulked and pulled his foot back. The Gretchen hastily picked up the stone and ran off, head bowed and small face full of gratitude. Ever since the boss had come to the tribe, Gretchen no longer had to take arbitrary beatings. If they worked, they got enough to eat. The mushroom fields in the South District were even livelier. 3 second-grade fields spread out, with giant green mushrooms taller than a person, dew beating under their caps. Gretchen pushed little carts, picking ripe mushrooms and taking them to the nearby brewery. Goblins used hoes to loosen the soil, occasionally plucking a small mushroom to pop into their mouths. Stone permitted that, as long as they didn't waste resources. Quick, loosen it faster. Once this upgrades to a 3rd-grade field, we'll be able to grow orc boys. Skinny Pole, who ran the fields, called out excitedly. Orc mushroom fields had a quirk. 1st grade produced only Gretchen. 2nd grade grew goblins and Gretchen, and 3rd grade could spawn orc boys. The higher the grade, the stronger the orcs that came from it. The tribe currently had just over 200 orc boys. If the fields reached 3rd grade, they could raise another 100 orc boys in 6 months and finally have the confidence to start a wah-gah. The system prompt said it plainly. Accumulate enough wah energy or win a medium-sized battle to upgrade. Stone already had a target in mind, but the tribe still needed time. He had to wait for bathhouses and breweries to be finished before making his move. In the East District, the newly completed Blackrock Brewery gave off a rich scent of fermenting mushroom wine. The stone building had a roof of rejected glazed tiles sent by Feluolae, cheap but durable, and a crooked wooden sign at the door read, Blackrock Brewery. A dozen goblin lads in matching hide aprons bustled about, chopping mushrooms, dumping the bits into large vats with swamp honey and clear water, or stirring the ferment with wooden ladles, wine stains streaking their faces but grins wide. Gretchen in comical hide suits scurried underfoot. Careful, don't drop mushrooms into the vats. Skinny Pole stood in the center with a ladle, sampling now and then. A goblin lad slipped a chopped mushroom toward his mouth, and Skinny Pole caught him. Xiao-san, you dare steal food? You're on washing duty. 10 extra vats today. Xiao-san scratched his head, put the mushroom back, and shuffled off to wash. The others laughed, but no one tried to filch food again. Skinny Pole was small but the boss's appointee, and crossing him meant no wine and a lot of weeding. Next to the brewery, the bathhouse foundation was being laid. A dozen thick wooden pillars rose from the ground, while goblin technicians measured. Great Ancient squatted nearby, clutching Stone's blueprint and scowling. The boss had ordered a large rectangular bath with several small pools, must allow 150 orcs to bathe together, and the water must be hot. The boss wants the pools in stone, but we don't have enough. Great Ancient complained to the technicians. The stones Feluolae sent went to the brewery and shacks. We've only got enough for half a pool. How about using mud? One technician suggested, voice small. Nonsense. Mud'll melt in water. Do you want the boss to fall into muck when he bathes? Great Ancient kicked him, and the technician dodged, not daring another word. Great Ancient was the tribe's only technician with a sense of aesthetics. He deliberately used some glazed tiles on the brewery roof to make it prettier, and now, forced to improvise, he could only build the pool edges and wait for more stone bricks from Feluolae. First, secure the wooden pillars, then go to Ironhold and get iron sheets to cover the roof, he barked, and the technicians returned to work with hammers. Sunlight fell on the bathhouse foundation, and the pillars cast long shadows like growing orcs, silent witnesses to the tribe's change. Back on the parade ground, Stone finally called the practice to an end. The formation was still crooked, but they could march 50 steps together, and their discipline had improved. He nodded and announced, "Good work today. Everyone gets an extra bowl of mushroom wine and half a piece of roast meat for lunch." The orcs erupted in cheers. Orc boys roared, "Whack!" and raised their axes. Goblins jumped and high-fived. Even Furball lifted his head and wagged his tail at Stone, as if asking for roast meat. Stone stepped down and patted Glenn on the shoulder. "You marched well. From now on, you'll be my personal guard." Glenn was stunned for a beat. Then his face lit up, and he nodded vigorously. "I'll listen to the boss. I'll practice hard." Stone smiled and looked over Yadu, the scent of wine from the brewery, laughter from the fields, the clang of the smithy, blended into a lively song. The tribe still needed time. Orc discipline still had to be hammered out, and the field still needed a battle to upgrade. But as long as these orcs followed him and Yadu and Ironhold kept growing, the Blackrock tribe would one day blaze across the howling forest. "Let's go see the brewery," Stone said, and turned toward the East District. Furball bounded ahead, his green shape bright in the sunlight. The orcs on the parade ground packed up their weapons and drifted off in twos and threes toward the residential area, already arguing about roast meat and mushroom wine for lunch, faces full of hope. The breeze through Yadu smelled of fermenting mushrooms. The stone shacks, growing fields, half-built bathhouse, bustling brewery, and busy orcs together painted the liveliest picture the Blackrock tribe had ever seen. 85. Angor Beast morning light spread over the mushroom fields in Yadu's western district, and the air smelled of damp earth and sweet fungus. 3 secondary mushroom beds merged into an emerald sea, giant green caps overlapping like forests of umbrellas, dew sliding from the edges and splashing onto the busy goblins below. The squigs pushed short-legged pump-pump carts, their baskets filled with fermented mushroom residue, the special effect fertilizer Skarsnik had invented. Sprinkled at the base of the mushrooms, it made them grow faster. The squigs tiptoed along the ridges, evenly scattering the residue, their stubby legs moving quickly. Slow workers risked the master's wrath. The goblins carried wooden rakes and carefully loosened the soil, the rake teeth wrapped in cloth to avoid scratching the stalks, another of Skarsnik's rules. Anyone who damaged a mushroom had to scrub the wine vats for 3 days. And the mastermind behind all of it lay sprawled on a hay bale in the middle of the field, cradling a squig the size of a football. The squig was earthy yellow, plump like a moldy potato on 2 short legs, nuzzling Skarsnik's chin and gurgling. This was Tudon, Skarsnik's pet, plucked from a pile of squig eggs and rumored to sense poisonous mushrooms in advance. Skarsnik squinted, a dried mushroom stalk between his teeth, one hand stroking Tudon and the other waving lazily. That patch on the left. Not enough fertilizer. Didn't you hear Tudon grumbling? 2 squigs on the ridge jumped, hurriedly pouring more residue from their carts, then bowed obsequiously toward the hay bale. Master Ska, we'll sprinkle enough now. No one dared to disrespect Skarsnik. Pointed-nosed, monkey-cheeked, full of wrinkles, and always walking with his hands tucked in, he looked arrogant, but everyone called him the tribe's mushroom lucky star. Since he took over the fields, he had expanded scattered plots into 3 secondary beds and discovered tricks like fertilizing with residue and irrigating with swamp water, nearly doubling the yield. Before, the tribe's mushrooms barely brewed enough wine and fed themselves. Now they could brew 20 extra barrels, dry mushrooms to sell to Feluale's merchant guild, and swap mushroom jerky for 10 bags of iron ore. With that kind of success, Skarsnik could afford to be arrogant. He didn't do the daily labor. He lounged on his bale and gave orders, and the goblins obeyed. His shack was the comfiest in the tribe, layered with 3 mushroom skin blankets and even silk pillows sent by Feluale. Even the boss, Stone, had to give way. When Stone wanted to build a warehouse near the fields, Skarsnik said it blocked the sun for the mushrooms, and Stone moved the warehouse to the northern district without complaint. All right, that's it for today. When the sun was high, he finally stretched, picked up Tudon, and jumped off the bale. The goblins stopped work and watched him expectantly. One nod from Master Ska, and the day's labor was done. Skarsnik brushed the hay from his hands and muttered to Tudon, "Come on, I'll take you for a walk in the forest. See if any new mushrooms have popped up." He sauntered toward the depths of the howling forest. Only after his retreating figure vanished did the goblins sit, secretly pulling dried mushrooms from their tunics to nibble. No one worried about him. The howling forest wasn't the chaos it had been a year ago. Kes and his night goblins, mounted on death crawlers, had mapped every path and set hidden outposts every 10 lie. The howling trail from the pine wood to the swamp's edge was firmly controlled by the Blackrock tribe. Caravans paid a management fee, and unfamiliar humans or goblins were often met with night goblin poison arrows before they even saw the camp. Stone had ordered a low profile, and between the forest's complexity and those orders, the mushroom fields and Yadu sat buried deep and safe from human and dwarf scouts. Skarsnik felt easier wandering the forest than staying in his shack. He moved slowly, bending now and then to part the grass for wild growths, tucking anything he liked into his bosom, and throwing poisonous ones to a few small squigs trailing behind. These little detectors were specially trained, black as night, the size of dogs, with noses keener than any goblins. If they ate something poisonous, they'd foam at the mouth, and the master would know at once. 3 of them followed now, wagging short tails and greedily devouring the mushrooms Skarsnik tossed. After half an hour, the sound of water came up ahead. Crescent Lake, a clear pool rimmed with reeds where Skarsnik often stopped. He reached the shore, squatted, and holding Tudon looked into his reflection. "Look at my handsome face," he muttered. "Much better looking than the boss's fierce hide." Tudon rubbed his head against him, gurgling contentedly. Then suddenly he wriggled free, jumped to the ground, and roared at the reeds on the far side of the lake. His body tensed, tiny teeth bared, eyes wide, his fur bristled all over. Skarsnik's smile vanished. Tudon never cried for no reason. Reed stalks rustled, and a green shape leapt out, landing on the muddy bank. It was a beastman, a Angor beast, under 2 meters tall, shorter than the orc boys of the tribe, with 2 short curved horns stained with mud. Sparse green fur covered its body, the hair on its chest matted with dried blood. It gripped a sharpened wooden spear with reed leaves still clinging to the tip. Murky eyes fixed on Skarsnik, saliva dripping from its mouth as it made strange ho-ho sounds. Skarsnik felt his stomach drop. Angor beasts served as the beastmen's light scouts, fast, expert at moving through woods. Why had one come so deep into the howling forest? Did the beastmen intend to push into the forest? Before he could decide, the Angor beast roared and lunged, spear aimed straight at his chest. An Angor beast wasn't as strong as a great horned beast, but more than enough for a goblin. Skarsnik wasn't flustered. He stepped back, brushed mud from his hands, and gave a sharp whistle into the denser trees behind him. Whoosh! Rustling answered from the woods, then over 30 dark little squigs thundered out. Dog-sized and plump, their stubby legs churned like wheels, and their open mouths were full of dagger teeth. Their eyes glowed red as they leaped at the Angor beast. The beastman hesitated, sneered. These little things couldn't even clog his teeth, he thought, and thrust at the lead squig. The spear pierced it, but 3 squigs latched onto his legs, their teeth tearing his green skin. Others swarmed, biting arms and neck, burrowing into clothing and ripping at flesh. The Angor beast slashed and killed a few, but they were too many. Like a swarm of black ants, they covered him. He tried to run, but his legs were already bleeding. He fell after a single step. The squigs pounced and tore at his head. With a sickening crunch, the biggest squig bit through his neck. The Angor beast's head rolled into the muddy water, eyes wide still, as if it couldn't believe a pack of little creatures had killed it. The squigs kept tearing at the corpse until Skarsnik walked forward and blew a short whistle. Instantly they stopped, jumped down from the body, and gathered around him, tails wagging, bits of torn meat in their mouths like puppies waiting for a pat. Skarsnik didn't praise them. He squatted by the corpse, face stern. This was no ordinary scout. The spear was carved with chaos patterns, and its green fur was stained with fresh human blood. It had come straight from a human village. Beastmen never traveled alone. The presence of an Angor beast this deep meant a beastman warband might be close behind, and the howling forest lay in the Blackrock tribe's territory. If the beastmen dared to come in and steal it, would be a slap in the tribe's face. Tudan, back to the tribe, Skarsnik said, lifting his pet and glancing once more at the body. He waved to the squigs. Drag this thing back. Let the boss see it. The squigs seized the corpse and fell in behind him as he headed for Yadu. Crescent Lake remained clear, but it mirrored Skarsnik's solemn expression. The appearance of an Angor beast had thrown a stone into a still pool. Soon the ripples would reach the Blackrock tribe. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, scattering over the forest path. Skarsnik walked much faster now than when he came in, and Tudan lay quiet in his arms, as if sensing the tension. Only the squigs behind him were still excited, carrying the Angor beast's head between them. 50 miles northeast of Katushir City, dust hung constantly over the red copper slope mine. Piles of gray-brown slag formed small, scorching hills under the sun. More than a dozen miners, faces noir with coal dust, emerged from the shaft, backs bent, wicker baskets bulging with ore. Sweat ran down their cheeks in white streaks. The mine entrance yawned like a black mouth. The steady ding-dong of chiseling and the miners' stifled coughs echoed through the valley. It was a small copper mine. The ore wasn't rich, but it was easy to extract, and the metal was vital to Katushir's iron forges. In the open above, a makeshift military camp had been raised. A dozen gray tents set crookedly around a wooden perimeter. Rusted swords hung on the fence at the gate. 2 soldiers in standard imperial leather armor leaned against the paling, yawning and gossiping, their unpolished spears propped at odd angles. At the camp's center, 4 officers sat around a rough table, collars unbuttoned to reveal greasy undershirts. A card game was spread across the table, gold trim flashing on their uniforms. Coins lay scattered on the wood. A copper platter overflowed with roasted chicken, cured meat, and wheat cakes. A wine flask lay toppled, amber ale beating along the edge. "Old Ford, your play is hopeless. If you lose again, you'll have to put up your saber," laughed the fat officer, slapping the table and holding an imperial knight card like a prize. Old Ford, rubbing stubble on his chin, pushed a silver coin across and grinned. "No rush, I'll win this hand." Laughter filled the clearing. The red copper slope had been quiet for 20 years, no bandits, no raids, and the garrison posted here, barely 100 men, had grown lax. The officers treated the post as a holiday. They drank, played cards, and sometimes foraged a few chickens from nearby farms for amusement. Deep inside the mine, the tunnels webbed beneath the stone. Torches were thrust into the walls, their flickering light painting the miners' faces in long shadows. Dozens gathered in the main tunnel's clearing for the half-hour break. Some smoked against the rock, others sat on slag and joked about home. Tom, an old miner whose face was carved in wrinkles, clutched a crumpled letter and smiled until his eyes narrowed. "My Aileen sent word yesterday. She's found work at the city's weaving mill, 5 copper coins a month," he told them, pride shaking his voice. Aileen was the only thing that mattered to him. "Once I've saved more, I'll bring her out here. I won't let her suffer in the city." Around him, the miners congratulated the man. A young miner leaned in, envious. "Uncle Tom, I wish I could get a job in the city like Aileen. I'm tired of digging in the dark every day." "You will," Tom said, folding the letter carefully and pressing it to his chest. "Work hard, save. One day you'll go to the city." They were laughing and talking when the ground beneath them trembled, barely noticeable at first. A torch flared. A few chips of rock fell with a sharp tap. Cave-ins were uncommon. At worst, a few stones loosened. Then the tremor surged into violence. The entire shaft shuddered, an underground roar, and torches clattered to the floor, some extinguished in slag, others setting dried brush alight. Smoke thickened instantly. Panic erupted. "Cave in! Run!" men shouted, scrambling toward the single exit. Tom gripped the rock wall and forced himself forward, the letter sweating in his pocket. A crack split the wall ahead, widening in a cascading shower of debris. A brave young miner leaned close, hoping the fissure would reveal a new vein and extra wages. Then 2 scarlet eyes blinked from the gap. A rat's head, matted fur and twitching whiskers, slid out first. The miner screamed and turned, but a roar of collapsing rocks swallowed him. With a thunderous crash, a hole opened, and over a dozen gray-black figures poured through. They had human bodies and rat heads, short, coarse fur, hands armed with sharpened sticks and rusty daggers. They ran with a nightmare speed, claws skittering over slag. "Ratman, kill! Steal all the ore!" Their leader squealed, nails scraping like stones. A dagger plunged into the nearest man's back. Blood sprayed. Chaos shattered all order. The miners scattered down the single tunnel and were trampled by those behind them. Tom crawled forward, inch by agonizing inch, his only thought Aileen. Then heavier footsteps shook the shaft. Smoke thinned and taller. Fouler things emerged from the breach. Goat-headed gores, bull-headed great-horned beasts, smaller savage gores, all matted in filth and smelling of rot. They wielded massive axes and iron clubs. These were beastmen, creatures Skarsnik's name had linked to the old tales. "Roar! Kill the 2-legged sheep!" A great-horned brute bellowed and cleaved a fleeing miner in half with a single swing. Organs and gore pattered across the slag. Beastmen and ratmen rampaged together. Ratmen darted through side tunnels, dragging away bodies to be butchered underground. Beastmen smashed anyone in their path, great axes and clubs driving men into bloody pulp. Tom saw a miner's head tumble to his boots, eyes still open. He saw a young man snatched and bitten, his blood spattering Tom's face. He could not stop. He pushed forward, clutching the letter like a talisman. He had to survive. He would find Aileen. Outside, the officer's laughter had been interrupted by a rude jolt. "Who set off explosives?" the fat officer swore, watching his cards scatter. Then distant screams and animal shouts rolled from the mine. Old Ford stood, frowning toward the entrance. Smoke curled out, and a mass of blackened miners burst out like madmen, shouting, "Ratmen! Beastmen! Run! Ratmen! Beastmen!" The fat officer scoffed, thinking it a prank, until a gray-black figure burst from the shaft and charged. It was a ratman, daggers slick with blood. More followed, then the great horned beasts, axes raised. With a roar, the leading brute smashed the fence. The camp was overrun. Old Ford was the first to react, drawing his saber and shouting for the others to arm themselves and to send word to Catastrophe City. But the beastmen were already among them. The fat officer never finished a scream. A great axe split him, and his guts dripped across the cards and steaming chicken. Ratmen ripped through the tents, dragging soldiers out to tear them apart. Old Ford cut one down, but more closed in from every side. He watched his comrades fall, one after another, and felt only despair as the camp collapsed into slaughter. The mine and the camp became a slaughterhouse. Ratmen and beastmen ran rampant, bodies strewn among slag heaps, blood staining everything red, the air filled with smoke and stench. No one on that slope knew why the creatures had emerged all at once. Not even the rocks could say why. Tom, stumbling with the crowd, kept the letter pressed to his chest and whispered through tears, "Aileen, Father will find you." In the dense woods halfway along the howling trail, the air was thick with iron and the sharp, sweaty tang of green skins. Dozens of them lay hidden in the undergrowth and in the branches on either side of the path. Orc boys clutching crude iron axes whose blades were wrapped in cloth to avoid catching a reflection. Goblin spearmen flattened against the slopes, spear tips pointing toward the center of the track. Night goblins perched on high pines astride death crawlers, poisoned arrows knocked, and their compound eyes sweeping the distance. Even squigs crouched behind the orcs, wooden spears in hand, faces a strange mix of tension and glee. On a high western slope, Shito peered through a brass telescope. He wore black iron armor trimmed with beast hide and had a bone tree staff tucked at his waist. The furball he'd brought along had grown to half a man's height and lay at his feet, green fur littered with pine needles, nudging his boots as if to say, "Why aren't we fighting yet?" "Their tracks should be here by now," Shito muttered, sweeping the telescope over the trees at the northern end of the trail. Skarsnik's Angor beast carcass suggested a beastman warband was moving south, likely toward Katushir. The Howling Trail was the only road from the northern forest to Katushir, narrow, hemmed in by woods, the perfect place for a greenskin ambush. He'd already sent Kess and the night goblins to block every side path at both ends, leaving only the main route as a death passage. They'd simply wait for the beastmen to stumble in and unleash a glorious wah! But the sun had climbed overhead, and no beastmen appeared. Only the occasional terrified caravan rattled through, seeing dark shapes in the trees and hurling down a few bags of toll money before fleeing, not even bothering to smooth their wheel ruts. "Boss, my axe is thirsty." Bone Tree's voice came from below. The orc, shouldering an axe taller than he was, squatted among the bushes and hacked at stray branches, impatience writ across his broad face. "Are the beastmen too scared to show? Shall we go drag them out?" "Not yet." Shito lowered his telescope and shouted, "Beastmen love loot. Katushir's got grain and iron. They won't detour." Still, a nagging unease crawled through him. Had Skarsnik been mistaken? Was that Angor beast just a lone straggler? He considered calling Skarsnik in. No one read the forest like that goblin, but before he could, thudding footsteps and ragged panting announced someone coming up the slope. "Boss, this is bad. Something's happened." Scarface skidded to a stop, breathless, his iron armor askew and a rolled parchment clutched in his hand. He was a Gretchen, taller than most, tougher than most goblin lads, one of Shito's earliest followers, nicknamed Loyal Dog. Now he could barely form a sentence. "Slow down and tell me," Shito said, taking the parchment. It was Feluole's handwriting, hurried and smeared with ink. "Feluole sent word," Scarface gasped, hands on his knees. "The beastmen, they didn't take the Howling Trail. They followed the Skaven, dug tunnels, and bypassed it. Katushir's surrounded." "Dug tunnels?" Shito felt the telescope nearly slip from his grip. He read the parchment aloud in a flat voice. "The Skaven nest at the Red Copper Slope copper mine connects to an underground passage. The beastmen used it to move south and have reached Katushir. City defenses are suffering heavy casualties. Request aid from the Blackrock tribe." Shito stared at the trees. Tunnel tactics, of all things. No matter how carefully he'd set traps along the Howling Trail, it wouldn't stop enemies emerging from beneath the ground. Half a month of preparing ambushes, blocking side paths and drilling formations. Wasted. They'd learned to tunnel around him, like Skaven rats. He cursed under his breath, a raw mix of anger and grudging admiration. Green skins like to charge straight in, humans favored lines. But the beastmen, those chaotic barbarians, stealing a tactic from the Skaven, who would have thought? The little furball lifted its head and rubbed against Shito's hand with a soft woo-woo. Shito breathed deep, squashing the flare of irritation. Getting mad wouldn't save Katushir. If Katushir fell, the Blackrock tribe would be next, Iron and cloth supplies would be cut off, and the mushroom wine Feluole would pay for would vanish. They could not afford that. Crooked Mouth, blow the horn, assemble! Shito spun and bellowed down the slope. Crooked Mouth's horn, an ox horn loud enough to carry 3 miles, replied with a long, keening blast that split the woodland silence. Orc boys burst from the bushes, axes aloft. Death crawlers dropped from the canopy, landing with a shower of leaves. Goblins poured from hollows and crevices, weapons flashing. The squigs trundled forward in crooked lines. In minutes, over 800 green skins, not counting squigs, had gathered in a dense, dark mass at the slope's base, a moving green blot across the undergrowth. What's the plan? Where are the beastmen? The orcs demanded, already raw with impatience. Shito jumped down and faced them. Frustration flared. An ambush turned into a long, empty wait would rile anyone, but he saw the same impatient hunger in their faces. Axes itching, spears twitching, thirst for blood and loot. Fun's over. Go home, he shouted. That set them off. Go home? My axe hasn't tasted blood. Bone Tree slammed his great axe into the earth, throwing dirt skyward. We waited all morning for this, the orcs demanded. The goblins muttered, maybe the beastman's scared. Let's go get him. The furball bumped Shito's leg with a cheer. Looking at his army's eager faces, Shito smiled and raised a hand. When the shouts died down, he said slow and loud, why wait? If the beastmen won't come to us, we'll go to them. The realization spread like fire. Shito pointed toward Catastrophe. They're stealing grain and iron around the city. By what right? Those spoils belong to the Blackrock tribe. We march now, strike the beastmen outside Catastrophe, and show them what green skins do to looters. Wah! The cry exploded through the woods. Axes whirled, spears spun, night goblins sharpened poisoned feathered shafts glinted, even the squigs waved wooden sticks howling. Bone Tree bounced up to Shito, breathless with excitement. We go now? Tell the lads to take all their gear. Not yet. Shito patted his shoulder. First, send Bone Tree back to Yadu. Tell Great Ancient to haul out every forged iron axe. Tell Skinny Pole to load 10 barrels of mushroom wine. We'll need celebrating after a victory. I'm on it, Bone Tree roared, leading the orc boys down the trail in a cloud of dust. Kez on a death crawler grinned at Shito. Boss, you always find a way. The lads were getting restless, but this'll do. Shito peered toward Catastrophe, though the city lay out of sight. The beastmen besieging it would have the defenders pressed hard. Feluole would call for aid. The Blackrock tribe could answer as reinforcements and walk right in to plunder, learn the city's weak points, and stage a glorious walk, all while gathering the energy they needed to upgrade the mushroom fields. 3 wins with 1 charge. Let's go. Back to Yadu. Shito swung onto the furball's back. It was big enough now to carry him easily, and it sprang forward, green fur streaming. The green skins formed up behind like a living torrent. Orcs belting out war songs, goblins wrestling and shouting, night goblins skittering through the canopy on spiderbacks, squigs squealing to keep up. Axes growled, mouths murmured about tusks and hides and blood. A rough chorus rose. Axes hungry for beast bone. Tusks want to tear hides. Greenskins' eyes blaze, ready to chop beast hooves. Wah! Orc horns for drinking cups. Beast blood mixed with wine. Smash their totems. Wah! Kill and steal. Crush beast dens with iron carts. Flatten skulls. Don't stop till we've chopped enough. Drink beast blood. Steal meat. The green skin whack burns. Sunlight sliced down through the leaves, painting their black leather and green skin gold. Shito fiddled with the telescope and smiled. The long wait had turned into something better. If the beastmen wanted to plunder Catastrophe, they'd first have to answer to the green skins of the Blackrock tribe. Smoke already rose from Ironhold in the direction of Yadu. Shito felt the thrill of what was coming. Fully armed, hungry, and furious, his army thundered down the howling trail toward Catastrophe, ready to deliver a surprise the besieging beastmen wouldn't soon forget. The gray-green walls of Catastrophe stretched taut as a drawn bow. Damp from morning dew, the bricks gleamed with a cold, hard light. 100 city defense soldiers in bright silver chainmail patrolled the parapet. Their iron boots struck the stone with a steady thump-thump, a drumbeat in everyone's chest. In the arrow towers, crossbowmen checked ballistas, bronze barrels polished to a shine, bowstrings pulled taut, grooves lined with heavy bolts whose tips were stained black with poison. Lookouts waved red and yellow flags from the watchtowers, each frantic motion signaling beastmen approaching, the shadows of the banners flickering across the wall like flames. On the inner walk, 7 or 8 soldiers formed a neat defensive line, spears, muskets, and halberds at the ready. Musketeers primed their caps, spearmen pointed their spear tips toward the sky, and halberdiers tightened their grips, eyes fixed on the open ground beyond the walls. These were Katushir's elite, the men normally posted at the east and west gates, now concentrated at the north gate because the beastmen pressed in from the northeast. Farther down the streets, hurried militia carried planks, stones, and arrows toward the walls under soldiers' shouts of command. Conscripted only 3 days ago, most of them were blacksmiths, carpenters, and merchants, people used to trade and craft, not war. Their faces still held terror, but the horns from the walls, the soldiers' barks, and the distant roars lashed them forward. A young militiaman shouldered a wooden plank, tripped, and nearly fell. A soldier steadied him with a heavy hand and a gruff, "Faster! Any slower, and it'll be too late." The militiaman swallowed, forced his feet to move, and looked beyond the walls. His chest tightened. Outside Katushir, it was already a living hell. The dozen or so villages and hamlets that had ringed the city lay in ruins. Thatched roofs were blackened to char, still smoking in wisps. Broken wooden fences lay tangled with tatters of clothing and mangled corpses. On dirt tracks, blood had carved rivulets downhill, staining the roadside grass a deep, sickly red. Crows alighted on the dead and cawed harshly. The beastmen had swarmed like locusts. Great horned beasts swung massive axes, splitting farm doors and hauling grain and cloth onto their backs. Gores dragged prisoners along with necks chained, herding them like livestock back to some looming encampment. Other gores sprawled on corpses, tearing at flesh with mouths stained dark and eyes bright with frenzied hunger. An Angor beast with a wooden spear pinned a tattered villager to the earth. The man's scream was cut short when the creature withdrew the spear and struck again. Nearby, dozens of captives, mostly women and children, were lashed to stakes. A great horned beast bent over a little girl, rough fingers pinching her chin as if assessing whether she was fit. Those judged fit would be taken as slaves, the rest as food. All of this had happened in 3 days. Using tunnels dug by the Ratmen, the beastmen had marched around the defenses of the Howling Trail and struck from the Red Copper Slope mine, catching Katushir flat-footed. Without walls, the outlying villages were the first to be crushed. In a single day and night, a dozen communities were looted. Thousands were killed or taken, few slipping into the city with the grim news: beastmen besieging Katushir. Inside the council hall of Katushir Castle, chaos matched the destruction outside. Merchants crowded the central carpet, humans in brocade robes, dwarf blacksmiths with iron hammers, here to sell their wares, and elf traders with delicate bird cages. They pressed around the Lord's chair, voices sharp with anger and fear. "Lord Iceville, why did we only hear of this now?" a fat merchant demanded, jabbing a finger at the Lord's nose. "My caravan's still outside, 30 carts of silk gone. You must compensate me." "My iron at Red Copper Slope is taken by Ratmen," thundered a dwarf, his hammer striking the stone floor. "Not a coin coming in." "My goods are in the western warehouse. The gates are shut. Every day I lose gold," an elf cut in. "Why should we donate to defend the city when our businesses suffer?" The merchant's complaints swelled into a buzz like an angry hive. Soldiers tried to restore order but were jostled and shoved aside. Lord Iceville sat in black armor trimmed with gold, the ruby-studded longsword at his hip. His face was pale. His fingers bit the armrests until the knuckles blanched. He had seen this coming 3 days ago when the first reports arrived. Now, as always, the city's traders put profit first, the fate of the city an afterthought. "Silence!" he thundered, slamming an arm down. The hall fell still. Standing, he swept the room with a hard gaze. "Katushir is besieged. Thousands of beastmen circle the walls. The city defense forces have taken heavy losses. If we fail, your goods, your coin, even your lives will be the beastmen's spoils." He paused, letting the words land. "I ask you to donate not for me, Lord Iceville, but to defend Katushir. If we hold, you will have a chance to recover your losses. If we don't, you will have nothing." The merchants shifted, calculating. If they gave goods and the city held, who would make them whole? If the city fell, their donations would be wasted. Greed whispered to hide rather than help. A fat merchant sneered, "Our goods cost real gold. Why give them away? Guarantee our compensation, and I'll donate." A chorus rose anew. Iceville's face tightened. Reason would not move them. He had to appeal to their self-interest. His gaze fell on a lone figure in the corner, a man in dark blue brocade, Feluale. He had stood silent, toying with a jade thumb ring. As head of the Golden Rose Merchant Guild, Catushier's largest local trade house, Feluale held more goods than any other merchant present. If he led the donations, the rest would fall in line. Feluale met the Lord's look without flinching. He knew what was at stake: the Blackrock tribe's trade routes, his own dealings with a man called Stone, and that giving would bind him to the city's fate. He also knew that backing the defense now would cement the Golden Rose's position here. He stepped forward, bowed slightly, and said quietly, "Lord, I will donate 2/3 of the Golden Rose Merchant Guild's goods, 20 carts of iron ore, 50 bolts of silk, and 100 barrels of ale, all for the city's defense." The hall went dead. 2/3 of his stock? The fat merchant tugged at Feluale's sleeve in a whisper. "Are you mad?" Feluale only smiled, saying nothing. Calmly, a purple brocaded merchant rose and ground his teeth. "If Mr. Feluale gives that much, I'll give half mine." The dwarf slammed a fist and bellowed, "2/3 of my ironware." Even the elf, with a sour face, conceded, "Half my silk." One by one, the others followed, some a third, some half, a few matching Feluale's 2/3. No one wanted to be the one who refused the merchant who set the standard. Few wished to bear the Lord's ire or lose standing in Catuchier. Lord Iceville let out a relieved breath. With these supplies, the defense could be resupplied with weapons and rations. The city's chances improved. "Very good," Iceville said. "Catuchier will remember your service." He gestured for the merchants to inventory and move their goods to the warehouses for soldiers to transport to the walls. They filed out, faces pinched but resigned. The fat merchant lingered by Feluale and asked again under his breath, "Do you really think we can hold?" Feluale met him with a steady smile. "We will hold," he said. He did not put his faith in the city guard or in the donated stores alone. He trusted the reinforcements he expected. Stone and over 800 greenskins were on the way. The beastmen besieging Catuchier would not expect a fiercer force to strike from behind. Iceville clapped Feluale on the shoulder. "We owe you much," he said. "You are too kind, Lord," Feluale replied with a bow. Iceville's eyes flickered with a question he had no time to ask. Who truly stood behind this merchant? The horns outside rose again, more urgent now. Soldiers on the towers flung their flags with frantic speed. The beastmen had begun their assault. "Everyone, to the walls! Defend Catuchier!" Iceville shouted, drawing his longsword. Beyond the hall, the city filled with shouts, the boom of ballistas, and the savage roars of the enemy. Feluale watched the Lord stride away, expression unreadable. He knew the worst was only beginning. 89. The Battle of Catuchier. The morning mist under Catuchier's north gate had barely lifted when it was torn apart by a chorus of screams. The city watch on the wall tightened their grips on their weapons. What first met their eyes were not the shaggy beastmen, but a string of ragged humans, ropes cinched around their necks like livestock, driven forward by the beastmen and shoved toward the walls. Most were villagers from the countryside. Some walked barefoot, their souls raw and bleeding from the gravel. Some held dying children, faces streaked with tears. Others were elders supported by younger relatives, swaying and moaning with every step. Their clothes were torn, bruises and blood staining visible skin, proof of the torment they had endured on the road. "Don't shoot! I'm from Kabu village, west of the city. I'm not a beast man." A middle-aged man broke free of a beastman's shove and bellowed up at the wall, desperation in his voice. "Lord Iceville, save us!" His cry struck the defenders like a stone. Those on the wall peered down, seeing familiar faces in the crowd. Distant cousins, the blacksmith who always served ale at the tavern, a brother who'd been missing for days. "That's my cousin. We can't shoot into them." A young archer cried, dropping his short bow, voice trembling. A nearby spearman frowned and muttered, "They're common folk. Whoever shoots is killing our own people." The defensive line wavered. The militia, pale and shaking, let their stones slip from numb fingers. None wanted to send their fellow citizens to their deaths. Keep your bows ready. Do not lower them." The order came crisp and undeniable from the arrow tower. Celisol sat astride a white warhorse at the tower's highest point, clad in silver-white light armor carved with griffins. A slender knight's sword hung at her hip. Her golden hair was pulled into a ponytail that whipped in the wind. As commander of Cathushir's 500 knights and the adopted daughter of Lord Iskaville, she knew what hesitation would cost now. The men and women on the wall all looked up to her. Her gaze swept over the pleading crowd and then fell on the wavering defenders. Her voice was cold and clear. "They are the Beastmen's battering ram. Let them reach the walls, and the Beastmen will use the chaos to climb over. If that happens, not only will these people die, so will everyone in the city." "But they are civilians," the young archer protested. He could not help it. The refusal to fire felt like a mercy. "Mercy now will mean slaughter later," Kalasal said, drawing her sword and pointing it downward. "Shoot. Anyone who hesitates will be treated as a traitor." She spoke quietly, but with absolute authority. The soldiers stiffened at her command, reading the resoluteness in her eyes. Reluctantly, they raised their bows. The young archer drew with shaking hands, tears streaking his face, but he could not argue with the truth of her words. Showing mercy here could doom thousands. "Loose." A rain of arrows fell from the wall like a black cloud. The middle-aged man's plea was cut off as an arrow pierced his throat. Blood spurted and he collapsed, convulsing once before going still. A mother clutching her child screamed and tried to shield the infant, but arrows tore through both of them. Bodies fell into pools of blood. Many on the wall shut their eyes. Some dared not look. The militia gagged and trembled. Only Celisol stood rigid on the tower, her face stony, knuckles white on her sword hilt. She wanted to save them all, yet she could not yield the wall. "Ha ha! Blood for the blood god! Skulls for the skull throne!" came manic laughter from below. A great horned beastman with a massive axe pointed up at Celisol and roared, "Your people are sacrifices to chaos. Cathushir will be rubble soon." The beastman's roars mixed with the civilians' screams into a hellish dirge. Celisol breathed and forced the pain in her chest down. Worse, she thought. The Skaven who had helped dig a tunnel for the beastmen had already taken the stolen ore and food back to their warrens. If the Skaven had stayed to press a combined assault above and below, Cathushir would have been lost. "Prepare! The beastmen are attacking!" Her voice snapped the defenders back into order. Grief turned to rage. The sight of their slaughtered neighbors lit a cold fury in their eyes. From afar came the heavy drum of boots. Beastmen poured out of the ruins like a black torrent, surging toward the wall. Ungors and Gors led the charge, short and vicious, some pushing makeshift siege engines, others carrying ladders. They wore chaotic iron and leather, some only rags, weapons crude and cruel. "Kill! Climb the wall! Kill them all!" An Ungor barked, shouldering a ladder and charging ahead. He tried to hook it onto the wall, stepping on the bodies of comrades. A spearman drove his spear through the Ungor's chest, and he fell, crashing into the beastmen below. "Arrows! Stones!" Kelisel shouted. The ballistae boomed. Arm-thick bolts whistled through the air, tearing into the horde and pinning several Ungors. Archers loosed volleys, and stones thrown by the militia smashed into skulls and faces, splattering brains and blood along the base of the wall. Yet the beastmen poured forward regardless, stepping over the dead and clawing at the wall with bloody hands. The siege engines slammed at the gate, its panels trembling and the iron rings screeching. Then a harsh horn blared from the rear of the beastman host. In the center of the attackers, Gor shamans in tattered cloaks danced around a black stone, the monolith of chaos. They chanted in guttural, unintelligible phrases, their hands sweeping the air. A black miasma bled from the monolith and washed over the attacking ranks. Rings of shadowy light snapped into being above the beastmen's heads and whirled, emitting an eerie glow. Where the rings settled, eyes turned blood red. Their faces, already hideous, warped further into madness. They began to make hoarse, guttural sounds and surged with doubled strength. An Ungor grabbed an arrow in midair and broke it with his hand. A Gor took a stone to the head and only staggered before resuming his climb. "Chaos magic! They have shamans!" Kelisel's jaw tightened. She drew her sword and called to the knights beside her. "Knights, prepare. When they get over the wall, cut them down. Do not let them establish any foothold." "Yes, Commander." 500 knights drew long swords, silver blades flashing coldly in the weak sunlight. They took their places along the inner rampart, eyes fixed on the maddened beastmen. Empowered by chaos, these attackers were far more dangerous. The coming fight at the wall would be ferocious. Below, the siege engine battered the gate and ladders were already peppered with red-eyed climbers. Crossbow bolts and stones rained down. Soldiers shouted, beastmen roared. The magic rings hummed. Celesil stood on the arrow tower, hair disheveled by wind, sword held firm. This siege had only just begun, and Cathushir's fate rested on this gray-green stretch of wall. Beyond the battlefield, a green-clad army moved rapidly through the distant forest, advancing on Cathushir. 90. Catu Hill Siege 2. Bang! A rusty iron axe slammed into the crenellation, sending chips of stone scattering. A blood-soaked Ungor climbed to the top of a siege ladder and cocked its goat-like head, its crimson eyes fixed on the soldiers on the wall, bloody foam and saliva dripping from its mouth. 2 crossbow bolts were lodged in its left arm, their shafts still quivering, but it gave no sign of pain. It lunged at the nearest spearman, sharp claws slicing the air with a rank, metallic stench of blood. The spearman, a young recruit named Leo, who had been in the army only 6 months, thrust his spear instinctively. The Ungor seized the shaft and ripped it away with brutal force. The spear slipped from Leo's hands and he staggered back. Before he could steady himself, the Ungor clamped its teeth down on his neck. A sickening crunch sounded. Blood spouted like a fountain. Leo's eyes went glassy and his body slumped against the wall, warm blood splattering a nearby sentinel. "Kill it!" A halberdier roared and brought his poleaxe down on the Ungor's back. The blade sliced through tough hide to bone, and dark green blood sprayed, smelling sour and putrid. The Ungor howled, lunged for the halberdier, but 3 defenders closed on it. One thrust a long spear through its ribs, another slit its throat with a short sword, and a crossbow bolt punched through its eye. The Ungor's bulk swayed and toppled over the battlement into the churning mass of beastmen below, setting off a deafening roar. This small clash was only a fragment of the slaughter on the wall. More beastmen poured up the ladders like a black tide. The city defense forces' lines broke and reformed under the officers' shouts. Steel met claw, roars tangled with screams, gray-blue stones of the wall stained a darker red. Bodies heaped in clots, defenders and attackers alike blurred together by blood and carnage. An old soldier in a dented bronze helmet fought a Gors with a short sword. The Gors, bestial, wolf-like, was smaller but lithe, circling and raking at the old man's legs. 3 bone-deep cuts already marked his left leg, blood soaked through the trouser, and every step seared with pain. He felt his strength draining and waited for any opening. The Gors lunged for his throat. The old man's eyes flashed. Instead of retreating, he stepped forward, pressed his left hand to the creature's head, and drove the short sword deep into its chest. The Gors screamed, claws raking his arm, nails nearly tearing to the bone. He wrenched the blade free and stabbed again and again until the thing stopped moving. He sagged against the parapet, panting. No sooner had he caught a breath than a Gors armed with a huge axe leapt off a ladder and landed before him. This Gors had a goat's head and a human torso. Bits of flesh clung to its curved horns. It raised its axe and brought it down. The old man, slowed by his injured leg, could only flinch. The axe fell with a sickening whoosh, cleaving him in 2. Flesh, organs, and blood spattered the wall, splashing 2 militiamen who had rushed up to help. "Hold, don't let them through." The city defense forces centurion waved his sword and shouted. His left arm dangled broken from an iron club strike, so he fought only with his right, but he still led the charge. An Ungor lunged. He sidestepped, his sword slicing the creature's neck. Dark green ichor sprayed his face. Wiping it away, he pressed forward and felt a cold stab down his back. An arrow had pierced his armor and buried itself in his heart. He looked back in disbelief. A Gor stood on a ladder, bow drawn, a cruel smile on its face. The centurion fell, blood soaking the stone. As life faded, he saw more beastmen pouring onto the wall and the line of defense collapsing. He reached blindly for something to hold, but found only warm, blood-greased brick. Then he closed his eyes. In the arrow tower, crossbowmen worked frantic rotations on the ballistae. Bronze barrels radiated heat, The bolts in the slots had been changed 3 times. One man bent to load when an arrow thudded into his shoulder blade. He grunted but, teeth clenched, shoved a bolt into place with his good hand and barked to his comrade, "Quick, adjust the angle, fire at the battering ram." His partner cranked the winch hard and aimed the muzzle toward the battering ram below the gate. "Fire!" The bolt screamed out and crashed into a beastman beside the ram, smashing it into a bloody mess that flew like a rag doll into the ranks. The 5 ballistae inside the tower kept cycling. Each thunderous report took a handful of beastmen. Bolts tore gashes in ladders, sending attackers crashing down. Others struck the shielded men around the ram, easing the gate's pressure. But for every handful felled, another wave surged. The numbers were endless. Below, the crude battering ram battered at Ketuhill's gate. Thick logs bound together, the tip shod in iron and still splintered from earlier raids, bow swung again and again. Dozens of gores and great horned beasts hefted the handles and roared, slamming it into the gate. Thump, thump, a dull drumbeat that sank into every defender's chest. From the tower above the gate, archers rained down arrows while men poured scalding lead and oil onto the press of beastmen. Where the molten metal hit, white steam hissed and shrieks cut the air. Scorched flesh blackened and bodies collapsed. Still, the attackers pressed on, shields raised like a hedgehog of wood studded with arrows. Many were riddled, some with bones exposed by the scalding, yet they bit down and shoved the ram forward. One great horned beast, its back blistered black by molten lead, only roared and pushed harder until it collapsed. Others filled the gap without pause. Boom! The ram struck again, and a hairline crack ran across the gate panel. Inside, dozens of men braced the gate, shoulders braced, backs pressed against the wood, long spears jammed horizontally for support. A captain howled, "Push harder! We must not let the gate fall." Faces reddened, veins stood out. The crack widened, splinters fell. A young soldier's voice trembled. "Captain, the panel's going to break. We can't hold." "Shut up," the captain roared. "Even if it breaks, we will block it with our bodies. The city stands as long as we stand." They fell silent and pushed with everything left in them. They knew once the gate gave, the beastmen would pour in like a tide, and the city's people would be slaughtered and sacked as the villages had been. There was no thought of retreat, only to hold the wall and buy time. On the battlements, the hand-to-hand fight raged. The city defense forces thinned. Militiamen abandoned tools and joined the fray. A carpenter-turned-militiaman swung his plane at an Ungor climbing the wall. It stunned the creature long enough for a soldier to drive a spear through its chest. He panted, staring at the fallen Ungor. I killed one," he breathed. A soldier clapped his shoulder, about to reply, when an arrow from outside pierced the man's throat. He fell. Rage flushed the militiaman's face. He scooped up the fallen soldier's spear and hurled it at a Gor. He missed, but the gesture steadied the others, who loosed a volley of arrows at the beast. Ballistae roared. The battering ram kept pounding, and the melee on the wall continued. Blood streamed down the stones, pooling at the base of the wall and staining the plain red. The beastmen charged and were driven back again and again, maddened and relentless. The defenders fought with bodies and blades. Buying time they did not know would be enough. Behind them lay Ketuhill, its people, their homes. If they fell, they would fall on the wall, their blood bought in the hope of saving others. Thump! The ram struck again. The crack on the panel spread, finer splinters giving under the strain. The men inside the gate roared and pressed with the last of their strength. 91. Ketuhill's Siege 3. The shadow of the Black Feather Forest had not fully lifted. 3 miles north of Katushir, in front of the Beastmen main camp, a large pitch-black banner embroidered with raven feathers snapped in the wind. In its center was a twisted symbol of chaos that pulsed with an eerie, dark glow under the morning sun. Beneath the flag stood a short, squat figure radiating malice. Yu, leader of this 3,000-strong Beastman tribe. Yu's appearance was grotesque, a perverse product of chaos. Barely 1.5 meters tall, he was smaller than an ordinary Ungor. A goat's head sat atop a human-like torso, his dark gray fur short and bristly. 2 curved goat horns were wrapped with dried snake bones. Most unnerving were the raven wings fixed to his back, spanning 3 meters when unfurled, their feathers black as ink. Each beat of those wings stirred a cold, fetid wind. Red, compound eyes fixed on the distant city walls of Catastrophe, and his mouth pulled into a cruel grin that exposed 2 rows of dagger-like fangs. "The Master's aura is getting closer," Yu croaked, his voice a grind of gravel. "This slaughter is not enough." He had been raised in the Black Feather Forest, steeped in chaos since childhood. The influence had given him wings and a vague sense of the will of the Lord of Chaos. Half a month earlier, he had felt the Master's whisper at the tribe's 10,000 Demons Rock. The gate of reality is about to open. It requires the sacrifice of tens of thousands of lives. To fulfill that demand, he had led 3,000 followers out of the forest and met a clan of Skaven who wanted a surface passage. The Skaven needed beastmen to smash the human defenses at the Red Copper Slope mine. You needed the Skaven to tunnel past Catastrophe's outer works. They struck a bargain. The Skaven would dig directly from the mine to the north of Catastrophe, and you promised them half the spoils. The plan had gone better than expected. 3 days earlier, the Horde had suddenly burst into the northeastern suburbs through the tunnel, sacking unprepared villages and towns and spilling over 1,000 human lives onto the Chaos Altar. Watching the blood-slicked light glimmer across the city walls, Yu's wings quivered. Still not enough. Tens of thousands remained in Catastrophe. Only by turning the whole city into purgatory could the Master be appeased. "Leader, the 2-legged sheep on the walls can't hold much longer." A blood-smeared Gore ran up and dropped to one knee, fanaticism raw in his voice. "We've placed ladders in 13 spots, and the gate is about to be smashed open." Yu did not turn. He raised a claw to dismiss the Gore. From his compound eyes, the scene on the walls was clear. Green-skinned claws shredded human armor, dark red blood streamed down stone, and human soldiers were being steadily pushed back. If this continued, the gate would fall before sundown. He could already picture tens of thousands of heads presented before the Gate of Chaos. Then an unexpected cry rose from the walls. On the eastern stretch of the North Gate, a silver-white figure rode hard on a mount. Kalessel's white hippogriff warhorse moved along the inner rampart, its iron hooves clattering over blood-streaked bricks. Her longsword flashed cold steel. Each stroke left an arc of dark green beastman blood. An Ungor surmounted the wall to strike. Kalessel sidestepped and buried her blade in its throat, then twisted to slice the neck entirely. The corpse toppled off the rampart and crashed into the horde below, sowing panic. She wheeled and shouted to the soldiers being forced back. "Warriors of Catastrophe, your homes are behind you. Take up your weapons. Fight." Her voice cut through the din like thunder. A young archer who had recently lost his cousin and had been cornered by 2 Gores wiped his face, drew, and loosed an arrow through one Gore's eye. A halberdier nearby roared, swung, and cleaved the other from the battlement. Celestial wove her mount among the defenders. Her silver-white armor blazed against the bloody light. She plunged a longsword into a Gore pinning a militiaman, then vaulted to a nearby arrow tower, took the winch of a ballista from a wounded crossbowman, and sent a bolt that punched through 3 beastmen at once. Every swing, every shout she made injected adrenaline into the exhausted defenders. "Follow the commander! Kill!" she roared. The call caught. The scattered defenses snapped back into order. Spearmen took the parapet, musketeers moved to the rear, and ballistae manned the towers. Even militiamen picked up knives and swords and joined the counterattack. "Musketeers, form ranks!" Calissel reined in her mount and barked to those on the central wall. 20 musketeers withdrew from melee and formed 2 lines, percussion caps already set, muzzles pointed at the ladders below. "Fire!" The first rank fired. Bangs rolled down the wall as lead tore through the climbing Ungor. 3 at the forefront were struck and tumbled from the ladders, crashing into the horde beneath. Before the enemy could recover, the second rank fired again. Another volley cut down more climbers. Whole ladders, once swarming, went half empty. Below, the battering rams still thundered against the gate, but despite 3 rotations of great horned beasts taking turns, the gate held. Dozens of soldiers inside braced against it, some wedging spears horizontally and using their shoulders to hold the door. The rams' impacts made their arms numb. Some coughed blood, but none yielded an inch. Yu watched from the main camp, frowning. He had not expected such stubborn resistance, nor that a single silver-clad woman could rally morale so effectively. The sun climbed, and the humans on the wall not only refused to crumble, but were mounting an organized defense. A sliver of ruthlessness flashed through Yu's scarlet eyes. "Sound the horn! Retreat!" he ordered. A hornblower at his side blew a different signal, a mournful, rapidly wavering blast that rolled across the battlefield. The attackers fell silent. Ungor on ladders balked and jumped down. The great horned beasts abandoned the ram and retreated toward the camp. The defenders seized the chance, raining crossbow bolts and lead into the withdrawing host and felling many. Then a heavy thunder of hooves erupted from the woods behind Yu. Hundreds of beastmen centaurs burst forth, horse bodies with human torsos, goat heads, and bull-like horns. They wielded long-handled battle axes and carried short bows. They split into two groups. One charged the walls with axes bared, while loosing a volley at the ramparts to suppress the counterattack. The other wheeled to protect the flanks of the withdrawing horde, covering their pullback to the front lines. The centaur's arrow storm was fast and dense. Soldiers ducked behind crenellations. One musketeer failed to dodge and took an arrow through the chest, collapsing and staining his uniform scarlet. Celesal rode between two militiamen to shield them, parrying arrows with the flat of her blade and moving her mount like a shield. She fixed her gaze on the beastman camp. There was a coordinated discipline in those centaurs' movements, a method to their withdrawal, unlike the usual scattered beastman horde that relied only on brute force. Especially the squat figure beneath the raven feather banner. While she could not make out his features from this distance, she felt an almost suffocating pressure. "This beastman tribe has a commander, and he understands tactics," Kalisel murmured. She had served years in the army and fought many beastman tribes. Most either acted alone or by sheer numbers. She had never seen a horde that executed advance and retreat with such precision. During the assault, they had held formation. In retreat, they had specialized centaurs providing suppression. It was a clearly planned operation. After 15 minutes, the suppression ended. The last retreating beastman slipped back into the main camp. The centaurs ceased firing and converged toward Yu's position. The battlefield fell quiet, except for the soldiers' heavy breathing and distant low roars from the beastman camp. Celesal reined in her mount and looked at the men beside her. Most were blistered with blood and battered armor, faces drawn with exhaustion, but their eyes looked to her with fierce resolve. The melee had lasted 6 hours. Corpses lay knee-deep on the wall. Blood flowed down the stone into a dark red pool at the base. "We held it! We held it!" An old soldier muttered as he slumped on the parapet, relief and weariness in his voice. They all breathed out in unison. Some leaned on battlements, others sat among the dead. The militiamen helped one another up, all haunted by what they had just survived. Celesal did not let herself relax. She knew the beastman's retreat was not a rout but a tactical regrouping. A commander who understood maneuvers would not give up so easily. This siege had only begun. She looked toward the main camp. The raven feather banner still fluttered. The squat, hideous form beneath it stood watching the city, unhurried. Celesal tightened her grip on her sword. Her silver-white armor was spattered with dark green blood, but she stood like a pillar on the wall. The wind smelt of iron and rot and blew across every soldier's face. They had a moment to catch their breath, but none dared lower their guard. The shadow of chaos had not lifted, and Katushir's crisis was far from over. Night fell like a heavy black curtain over Katushir. In the dense wood along the edge of the howling forest, more than 800 greenskins huddled behind bushes and ancient trunks like dormant, poisonous spiders. Orc boys gripped iron axes, their heavy breath steaming white in the cold. Some rasped their blades over stones, a soft shasha in the night. Goblin spearmen lay on the slope with wide, eager eyes, saliva at the corners of their mouths. They had been holding back all afternoon and wanted nothing more than to rush out and hack some beastmen for sport. Night goblins rode death crawlers up into the treetops, their compound eyes reflecting an eerie green as they notched poisoned arrows. Even the Gretchen clutched sharpened wooden spears, faces a mixture of tension and excitement, poking one another and whispering, "When do we start?" Stone sat on a thick pine limb, big enough for 3 men to hug, his brass telescope trained on the distant beastman camp. Moonlight sifted through the needles, making his black leather armor glint coldly. The furball in his lap was asleep, a round bundle of green fur flecked with pine needles, occasionally grumbling in its dreams. "Don't rush. Let me get a clear look," Stone called down. Below, Bone Tree paced like an agitated bull, hefting his massive axe. He stopped at the words and grumbled, "Boss, my blade's nearly rusted. If we don't act soon, those beastmen'll loot all of Catastrophe." "Patience," Stone said, and kept watching through the glass. Under the moon, the beastman camp was more orderly than he had expected. Nearest the city walls was the vanguard camp, about 1,500 beastmen behind a ring of sharpened stakes. Dozens of ladders and 3 crude battering rams, still stained with the day's blood, leaned against the palisade. Battle-scarred Ungor and Gors slumped against the stakes, some licking wounds, others gnawing on raw meat. Dark green blood dripped into small puddles beneath them. These were the troops that had led the daytime siege, battered but still fierce. Half a mile behind them burned the central camp, the brightest bonfires and a dozen black, raven-feathered banners planted in the center, chaos sigils flickering in the flames. Its palisades were thicker and studded with human skulls for intimidation. Stone adjusted his focus and saw tall, heavily armored figures inside, great horned beasts and bull warriors, iron horns wrapped with chains, massive axes heavier than an orc's. They were elite, hulking, and heavily muscled. In the center stood a crude altar. Cloaked Gor's shamans danced around it as black chaos energy swirled like a storm. To the left rear of the central camp, closer to the trees, was a flank camp. Its fires were few, and the place was eerily still. Stone leaned in. This camp was made up of beastmen centaurs, Angor beasts, and Gor beasts. The centaurs lay poised on the grass, horse bodies tense and ready to charge. Angor beasts patrolled with long spears like shadows. Gor beasts, longbows slung on their backs, stood watch against trunks, eyes scanning every tree line. The plain in front of the flank camp was flat and open, perfect for a quick charge or a fast retreat to buy time for the main force. "I didn't expect the beastmen to have strategists," Stone murmured, lowering the telescope. He'd met beastmen who charged in disordered mobs, not ones arranged in vanguard, center, and flank, with an obvious plan for cover and withdrawal, more organized than Catastrophe's own defenses. Below the tree, the greenskins muttered and shifted. Some orcs had begun arm wrestling. Some goblins sneaked dried mushrooms from secret pockets. The furball woke, squinted at Stone, and made excited woo-woo sounds as if asking, "Why aren't we fighting?" Stone stroked it and refocused on the central camp. The side gate creaked open. A dozen bull warriors bearing huge axes slipped out first, then over 100 great horned beasts moved like dark boulders in the moonlight. They threaded a narrow path toward the vanguard camp, elite troops on the march, light-footed and silent. Now Stone understood. The beastman commander was preparing a night raid, quietly transferring veterans to the front to break the city in one blow. Less than 15 minutes later, a low horn blew from the vanguard. Woo! Unlike the mournful daytime blast, this was a suppressed rhythm, a beast's low growl in the dark. The palisade was shoved open. Beastmen poured out without torches. Their red eyes glowed like coals. Ungor and Gors led, clutching ladders and snarling. Behind them strode newly arrived great horned beasts and bull warriors, each step making the ground tremble. At the rear, the Gor beasts knocked arrows and aimed at Catastrophe's walls. They moved slowly and deliberately, planning to use the night to surprise the city. Stone waited. He had assumed Catastrophe's defenders would be exhausted and lax after the day's fighting, but he hadn't expected. Torches flared along the city walls. Firelight washed over the battlements and revealed the approaching horde. Soldiers peered over the crenellations, drawing bows and knocking arrows. Ballistae rolled to the edge of the towers, their muzzles pointed at the horde. A handful of musketeers crouched behind battlements, priming caps faintly sparking in the light. "Heh," Stone said softly. The silver-armored knight, Kalisal, had not been caught unawares. Mounted on a white griffin steed, her armor flashed in the torchlight as she swept the field with a hard, cold gaze. She'd anticipated a night attack and doubled the guard rotations. The soldiers, although tired, were alert. The exposed beastmen faltered. The Ungor in front hesitated under the bright torches, arrows and lead-shot memories from earlier still fresh. Then a horn blew again from the central camp, more urgent this time. The beastmen answered like beasts at the call, let loose with roars, and surged. "Fire arrows!" Kelesel commanded. A black rain of arrows fell from the walls. Ungor toppled in numbers, dark green blood splattering the earth, but the horde pressed on. Great horned beasts trampled the bodies and swung massive axes, trying to overwhelm the battlements. From Stone's perch, he watched the defenders work in weary but efficient rhythms. A silver-armored knight carving arcs of blood as she rode the walls, coordinated volleys and ballista shots holding the line. The night raid was fierce, but Katushir's preparations blunted it at every turn. "Boss, when do we go in?" Bone Tree demanded from below, voice edged with impatience. The greenskins were aflame with the battle before them, orc boys itching for slaughter, goblins dreaming of loot. Stone didn't answer. Not yet. Both sides were still fighting hard, trading heavy blows. He wanted them to bleed until the tide turned in his favor. When both the beastmen and the city defenders were at their most spent, the Blackrock tribe would rush in to seize the spoils. Moonlight and torchlight mingled. Arrows and beastly bellows stitched the night. The smell of blood drifted through the trees and sharpened the greenskin's senses. Stone cradled the furball. It watched the battlefield with bright eyes and soft, eager cries. "Don't rush," Stone whispered to Furball and to himself. "The real show has just begun." Below, the greenskins settled into a tense hush, trusting their boss's patience. The distant clash and the horn calls bled into the forest like a battle song, an omen that the chaos was far from over. On Katushir's walls, the night raid ground on, arrows never ceasing, and beastmen roaring into the darkness. Katushir's four-colored city walls had become seething furnaces of blood. The roars of the beastmen rose from the four gates, east, south, west, and north, while masses of bestial hands clawed at the mortar, scrabbling up the stones. Iron axes swung by Ungor, arrows loosed by Gore beasts, and the long spears of the Angor beasts rained down on the battlements like a crimson storm, staining the moonlight. The north gate was the worst. 3 bull warriors leaped onto the wall, standing on the corpses piled at the tops of the scaling ladders. Their iron hooves cracked the blue-gray stone. These minotaur giants were broader than 10 feet at the shoulders, gray-brown fur crusted with dried blood, horns thick as iron pillars. They swung massive axes in wide arcs. The leftmost bull warrior cleaved into the city's pike formation, snapping 5 long spears at once. Its blade carved 3 arcs of fresh blood. 3 men were split in 2 before they could cry out, their entrails and blood splattering the wall and a nearby swordsman's face. "Form ranks. Surround and kill it," someone shouted. 5 Katushir swordsmen in griffin-marked armor closed in, the silver-white griffin on their breasts catching the torchlight. Their leader stepped over a fallen comrade and thrust diagonally, driving his longsword into the bull warrior's armpit, where the hide was thinnest. The minotaur bellowed and countered with a horizontal sweep, but its axe was held by the scabbards of the other 4. The leader twisted and plunged his blade into the beast's throat. Dark green blood sprayed out. The bull warrior swayed and toppled, crushing 2 Ungor who were climbing beneath it. Before the swordsman could recover, 2 more bull warriors reached the parapet. They took their positions back to back and began to swing. The gusts from those axes forced the defenders to fall back. A young swordsman, too slow to dodge, was grazed across the shoulder. His mail split. Blood ran down his arm. As he tried to retreat, a bull warrior kicked him in the chest and sent him tumbling from the wall into the waiting mass below, where he was torn apart. At the east gate, the fighting was no less brutal. The beastmen there were cunning. Gore beasts kept up covering fire, while Angor beasts, agile and monkey-like, skittered along the battlements by night, leaping out to ambush the defenders. Katushir's knights rode their warhorses along the narrow wall, hooves slipping on blood-slick stone. One knight had just plunged his lance through an Angor beast's throat when an orc arrow from the shadows punched through his armor. He slumped, his mount reared and bolted into a nearby soldier, and both fell from the wall. "Use the muskets! Aim at the battlements!" the captain bellowed. 10 musketeers snapped into line and fired. An Angor beast about to peer over the parapet was cut down in a spray of lead. But before the musketeers could reload, a strange black mist oozed up from below, the beastman's chaos magic. It crept over the wall with a sour, putrid stench. Any soldier who touched it broke out in red, swollen welts and clustered pustules. When the blisters burst, yellow-green pus ran. Men screamed, scratched until bones showed, and some went worse. Eyes reddened, minds snapped, and they turned on their comrades. A musketeer was stabbed through the chest by a man who had been his friend moments before, dying with disbelief frozen on his face. "Cut down the mad ones! Don't let them get close," the captain roared, sweeping his longsword through a maddened soldier. But the corruption spread too fast. The defenders had to fight both the beastmen and their own crazed comrades, and formation fell apart. Catushier's artillery steadied the line. From the arrow towers at the west and south gates, 12 bronze cannons thundered. "Fire!" The salvos screamed out, iron shot tearing into the beast horde and leveling swaths of attackers. One round struck a battering ram dead on. The log shattered, and the beastmen on it were flung into bloody pieces. The roar of the guns bolstered the defenders. Musketeers reloaded and fired again. Lead tore through hide and flesh, but the beastmen came in endless waves, every smashed heap replaced by more bodies crawling up the walls like a plague of locusts. In the central arrow tower, a broad fire cast dancing shadows across the room. Lord Iceville stood by the window in heavy black armor. The rubies set in his breastplate gleamed in the flames. He watched the flickering fires at the gates and listened to the distant clamor, fingers white around his sword hilt. "When will the reinforcements you promised arrive?" he asked hoarsely, a tremor just under his voice. Filuoli, in a dark blue brocade, stood behind him with a cup of ale in hand. He kept his tone steady, but his fingers picked at the rim of the mug. He had already sent 3 messenger parties to reach Chiteau with no reply. "My lord, they are on their way," he said. "The road is long, and they must avoid beastmen scouts, so they'll be slow." Iceville's face tightened. He had counted on Feluoli's influence, and that it had failed here stung bitterly. Catushier's 500 knights had taken more than half casualties, fewer than 300 veterans remained, and the militia had bled in the thousands. If reinforcements did not appear soon, the city, perhaps even the castle, might fall. "It had better be," Iceville said. He walked to the sand table at the tower's center and stared at the tiny red flags, Catushier's positions, being driven back by black flags until only the city wall remained. Filuale did not reply. He moved to the window and peered toward the howling forest, uneasy. What was Chiteau waiting for? Did he intend to let Catuchier fall and then pick over the spoils? Then he remembered that if the city were taken, the Blackrock tribe's trade route would be cut. Chiteau would not be that short-sighted. Outside the city, beneath the raven feather banner, in front of the beastman's central tent, Wu watched the firelight on the wall through scarlet, compound eyes. He had thrown almost everything into the assault: 300 great horned beasts, 80 bull warriors, 400 ungor, all the gore from the central army, and half the beastmen's centaurs from the flank force. The vanguard camp that remained now had fewer than 500 fighters. The central army that stayed behind was a bedraggled 200 of old and weak. The flank camp had only a little over 100 centaurs and angor beasts left to guard it. The city must fall before dawn. Wu bellowed to a messenger, his voice raw with chaos fervor. "Whoever first reaches the wall will be the first offered to the master." The messenger ran off. A horn sounded again, and the front lines surged with renewed ferocity. Bull warriors slammed their bodies into the battlements, pried at stone with their horns, and broke bricks. Ungor clambered over the heaps of their kin and spilled onto the parapet like a tide, determined to pull a human down, even at the cost of their own lives. The carnage on the wall reached its peak. Catushier's swordsmen and knights fought with bloodshot eyes, armor smeared with dark green beast blood. Blades were chipped but still swung. Militiamen hurled knives, rocks, and anything they could find, refusing to give ground. Kaelisel rode her white griffin warhorse along the north gate, charging back and forth. She had already broken 3 enemy blades, and now wielded a long spear taken from a fallen soldier. Each thrust ended a beastman. Her silver-white armor was dark with crimson, her golden hair matted with gore, yet she stood like an immovable war goddess upon the parapet. "Kill! Hold the wall!" she cried. Her hoarse shout cut across the chaos, and the soldiers rallied, using their bodies to hold the line. corpses piled so high in places that the battlements were blocked and the beastmen had to clamber over the dead to get at them. In the dense woods at the edge of the howling forest, Shito stood in the crook of an ancient pine, telescope to his eye. After the latest war horn, the flank camp had thinned out. Through the lens, he saw only a few scattered bonfires and a few dozen Angor beasts patrolling. Most of the beastmen centaurs had gone to the front. A smile finally touched his face. "Boss, the chance is here," Bone Tree exclaimed, axe glittering in the moonlight. Shito lowered the glass. The flank camp sat on open grassland with no cover, ideal ground for the greenskins to spread out and strike. If they sowed chaos in the flank, they could wheel behind the front and trap the exhausted beastmen and the battered defenders between two forces. "Send the word," Shito called down to Kess at the tree's base. "Night goblins on spiders will take out the patrols. When the spiders clear the watches, the orc boys form a charging squad and rush in. Goblin spearmen and archers give cover. The squigs, let them follow to grab the loot." "Understood, boss," Kez answered, already mounting his death crawler to carry the orders deeper into the woods. The greenskins erupted into motion. Orc boys raised iron axes and bellowed a war cry. Goblins fussed over weapons. Night goblins on giant spiders slipped into the shadows toward the flank camp. Squigs grasped crude sticks and glared with greedy eyes. Furball leapt from Shito's arms and yelped excitedly, its green fur catching the moonlight. Shito watched the distant flames and allowed a cruel grin. Both the beastmen and Katushir had bled themselves dry, unaware that the Blackrock tribe's greenskins were about to seize the prize. "Thanks be to Gork and Mork," he murmured, leaping from the tree and landing hard. Bone Tree and Kez clustered to his side. Under the moon, over 800 greenskins moved like a living, rolling torrent through the shadowed trees toward the beastmen's flank camp. The fighting on the city walls still shook the night sky, but no one realized that an assault now slipping into place behind the beastmen would soon threaten to change the whole course of the battle. 94. Catuhill Siege 6. At the edge of the howling forest, the undergrowth suddenly erupted in green. Over 800 greenskins burst from cover and charged toward the beastmen centaurs' auxiliary camp like mad bulls. Orc boys with iron axes thundered through fallen branches, roaring as they crushed everything in their path. Goblin spearmen, short legs churning, jabbed their long pikes forward and shouted, "Grab stuff! Cut down the beasts!" Night goblins on death crawlers wove along the formation's flanks with poisoned bows already knocked. Even the Gretchen at the rear gripped crude wooden clubs, faces alight with excitement. Finally a scrap to join in. Stone ran at the head of the charge, his black leather flapping in the wind. He waved a bone staff and bellowed, "Hurry! Don't let those long-haired monsters get away." Furball streaked at his side, green fur flying, teeth bared as he snarled at the camp ahead. Inside the auxiliary camp, the beastmen centaurs who had been leaning against tree trunks watching the city walls suddenly pricked up their goat ears. The lead centaur, one-eyed, its bullhorns wrapped in human intestines, turned and howled, "Enemy attack! Prepare for battle!" Angor beasts seized their long spears and surged forward. Gore beasts flipped over to use their horse halves and loosed arrows at the charging greenskins. In moments, 100 or more beastmen formed a makeshift defensive line, Angor beasts up front, Gore beasts shooting from the rear, and mounted centaurs pacing on the flanks ready to charge. A rain of arrows whistled toward the greenskins. Several of the faster goblin spearmen failed to dodge and were struck in the back, collapsing with screams. The greenskins barely noticed. Orc boys stepped over the bodies and pressed on, their roars growing louder. "Ha! Finally, something new to play with." Stone grinned, then stopped and shouted, "Bring out the gear. Let these long-haired monsters see the might of the Blackrock tribe." Hundreds of orc boys halted and hastily unbuckled heavy wicker baskets from their backs, baskets woven of vines and shrouded in black cloth. With a tearing of fabric, they tipped them over. Out tumbled round fleshy lumps, squigs, dog-sized, covered in dark red bristly fur, jaws full of dagger teeth, two short legs churning like wheels, eyes burning red. At the sight of the beastmen, they let out ear-splitting squeaks and roared, "Squeak! Squeak! Bite them to death!" Stone cried, and the squigs surged. They ran like a pack of red furballs straight between the Angor beast's legs. Spears tried to stab them, but the squigs were too fast. They leapt and clamped on shins and throats, teeth cutting through flesh. Dark green blood spattered the grass. One Angor beast, bitten by 3 squigs at once, dropped its spear and reaching, was slain as another squig sank its teeth into its throat. The defensive line collapsed in chaos. Some beasts stamped the squigs away. Others fled wounded and bleeding, unable to hold scale against the greenskin onslaught. "Now, charge!" Bone Tree roared. He led 50 iron-armored orc boys, Blackrock veterans with breastplates and gleaming axes, in a wedge, Bone Tree at the point like a living spike. His great axe split an Angor beast's skull. Dark green brain matter splattered his face, and he did not pause to wipe it away. He drove on, cleaving down 2 more as they tried to break. The orc boys followed, axes swinging, hacking the beasts down into pools of gore. The squigs continued to gnaw at the fallen. Meanwhile, the goblin archers rolled into range and opened fire on the gore beasts in the camp center. Their aim wasn't as clean as the gore beasts, but there were numbers enough. Hundreds of arrows rose like a black cloud, peppering the gore beasts' shields until wood was riddled and arrows pierced through to those behind. "Damn greenskins," the one-eyed centaur snarled, brandishing a long-handled battle axe. "Don't trade volleys, flank them." The centaurs spun and galloped, their horse halves eating ground with deadly speed. On flat grass, they were faster than death crawlers, circling the greenskins, loosing arrows as they passed and then withdrawing, persistent, harassing hits but never a full commitment. Stone cursed. The night goblins' death crawlers could hunt them in the trees, but not on the open plain. The centaurs kited and peppered the goblin archers relentlessly. "Scarface, bring the spearmen, form a double wall," Stone snapped. Scarface, leading over 100 spearmen intending to charge, halted and bellowed orders. 50 left, 50 right, raise your spears, make a double wall." The goblins split obediently, planting 2 dense ranks of spear points outward. That simple formation was perfect against cavalry. If the beastmen dared to charge, they would impale themselves. The one-eyed centaur halted, seeing the spear walls. Kiting was futile now. The flanks were blocked and the front was nearly broken. It hesitated, watching gore beasts fall to the orc boys, then snarled, "Retreat, back to the main army." The centaurs wheeled and galloped off, vanishing into the trees. Stone watched them go with a flicker of regret but knew the truth. Without cavalry of their own, they could not catch the centaurs on the plains. "Forget it, these ones first," he said, and led a charge into the camp center. By then, the gore and angor beasts in the center were breaking. Orc axes swung like cleavers. Beastmen fell by the score. Squigs tore at bodies until bones showed. The goblin archers at last raised their heads and rained arrows on the remaining defenders. One gore beast, terrified, dropped bow and arrows and begged for mercy, kneeling. An axe answered. Its head was lopped off. Greenskins did not take prisoners in the heat of a raid. Kill or be killed. In less than 15 minutes, the auxiliary camp was wiped out. The ground was a ruin of hacked bodies and gnawed bones, dark green blood pooling into stinking streams. Orc boys raised axes and howled a triumphant "Wah!" Goblins scrambled through the corpses, stuffing whatever they could into pockets, old coins, rusty blades, bull horns to bring back as trophies. Night goblins on spiders scoured the perimeter for stragglers, while Gretchen dragged off spoils and the dead to feed the squigs. Stone stood by the central fire, and when the cheering subsided at his clearing of throat, climbed a small mound. He pointed his bone staff toward the beastmen main camp, and voice rough and loud, declared, "Those long-haired monsters just now weren't worth the effort. Our Blackrock veterans can cleave the ones in the main army in 2. The greenskins laughed and banged axes on armor. Stone's voice rose. "We wiped the auxiliary camp. Now we go for the main army. They'll have better weapons and more loot. We kill them, strip them, and let all of Catastrophe know the Blackrock tribe is the fiercest." "Wah!" The war cry burst up again. Orc boys brandished iron axes, shaking leaves from the trees. Goblins leaped and shouted to grab gear. Night goblins circled with poisoned arrows ready. Even the Gretchen cried along, tiny faces ecstatic. "Good," Stone nodded. "Scarface, have the Gretchen carry the spoils. The rest, follow me. We cut down the main army's long-haired monsters." "Yes, boss," Scarface barked. "Gretchen, hurry, don't leave anything valuable." The Gretchen raced off. some hauling iron swords, others dragging carcasses, one even lugging a copper pot from the fire. Greenskins consider anything that can be carried to be loot. Stone led orcs, goblins, and night goblins toward the beastmen main camp. Under the moon, their green tide surged again, axes glinting, roars and battle songs blending into an unstoppable force. They paid no heed to the Gretchen struggling under their loads. One small scavenger slipped, and the copper pot clanged to the ground. He scrambled up, clutching it, terrified of being left behind. These spoils were the only pay they'd see. On the walls of Catastrophe, the battle continued. Kelisel, astride her warhorse, had just cleaved down a bull warrior when a distant roar reached her ears, the sound of greenskins. She paused and looked toward the forest, where a dark green wave was racing for the beastmen main camp. What was that? She frowned, uneasy. In the sword tower, Faluale heard the same roar. He straightened, a smile, long gone, returning. Stone had finally arrived. Under the raven feather banner in the beastmen main camp, Wu paced like a caged animal. News had come of the auxiliary camp's attack, but not that the attackers were greenskins. How had these savage greenskins turned up here? He watched the green torrent racing for them and felt a flash of panic in his scarlet compound eyes. The main army barely numbered 200 old and weak. They could not withstand so many greenskins. What was happening? When had greenskins allied with humans? Damn it, so close. Damn it all. A green tide rolled over the plains toward the beastmen's central camp. The battle cries of the Blackrock tribe split the night as iron axes and long spears glinted under the moon. The ground itself trembled under the heavy hooves and boots of the greenskins. In the center of the camp, the large raven feather banner whipped violently. Chaos sigils on the black pennant twisted in the bonfire light like a gaping, ghostly grin. Wu turned, his scarlet compound eyes narrowing on the charging horde. He had not expected this sudden onslaught of savages, but chaos had given him more than raven wings and brute strength. It had sharpened his mind so that he could think clearly even when the world fell apart around him. His hoarse roar cut through the clamor. "Wagzaga!" he bellowed. "Take your bull warriors, and anyone else who can fight, and stop those greenskins outside the camp. Hold them, even if you die." A tent on the camp's west side burst open. A towering figure, a head taller than most bull warriors, stormed out. Wagzaga's gray-brown fur was caked beneath heavy bronze plates. Dried dark red blood clung in the gaps. His curled horns were polished bright and tipped with the broken segments of 2 human longswords. Chosen by Wu from among 300 bull warriors, elevated to bull champion, his massive axe weighed twice what others could lift. Chaos runes ran along its blade, each swing tearing the air itself. "At your command, Commander," Wagzaga rumbled, planting his axe into the earth. "Bull warriors, with me, chop these greenskin vermin to death." 50 armored bull warriors thundered out, iron hooves drumming the soil. 100 Ungor howled behind them, clutching rusty iron axes. 50 great horned beasts bore thick wooden shields, forming a moving wall that advanced slowly. In moments, over 200 beastmen stood to block the camp's center like a black, living barricade. "Kill!" Bone Tree's roar came first. He led 100 orc boys in a headlong charge that slammed into that defensive line like a blade. The great horned beasts raised shields to blunt the impact, but Bone Tree's axe crashed into a shield with a harsh crack. The bronze blade sheared a deep gouge through the wood, and the beasts behind stumbled back. One bull warrior swept his axe in a wide horizontal arc at Bone Tree. The orc sidestepped. Sparks flew as the blade scraped his iron armor. Bone Tree countered with a backhanded strike to the bull warrior's knee. Bronze plates shattered and dark green blood sprayed. The bull warrior screamed and fell, then had his head cleaved off by Bone Tree's follow-up. Scarface led goblin spearmen in a flank. Their long spears struck like clustered snakes at the throats of the Ungor, who were brave but could not resist such concentrated thrusts. They fell, claimed by the orc axes. Goblin archers scuttled prone across the field, showering arrows at the beastmen. Their aim was messy, but in ambush they were lethal. Every so often a bull warrior would take an arrow through the eye and collapse with a scream. Still, the bull warrior's might outmatched the attackers' expectations. One bull warrior, surrounded by 5 orc boys, swung and sent axes spinning, cleaving 2 orcs in half. He kept fighting through 7 or 8 wounds until 3 spears finally pierced his chest, and he crashed down. These long-haired monsters are tough, Bone Tree spat, wiping blood from his face and shouting to Stone. Boss, we have to take out those bulls. Stone stood at the edge of the fray, brows knotted. The fight was tipping into a stalemate. The bull warriors' heavy armor and raw power gave them a decisive edge. The greenskins' numbers were only slowly wearing them down. If the beastmen's forward forces returned before the attackers could break the line, the assault would fail. He raised the mottled bone staff in his right hand, old rotted-toothed staff, a reward from the system. Dark brown bone etched with shaman runes, it thrummed with warm magic in his grip. I practice both magic and warcraft, Stone growled, tracing the runes. Greenskin shamanic magic was never subtle. It was blunt, brutal, immediate. He drew on the wah within him and poured it into the staff. Magic, itching assault. A strange green glow flared at the staff's tip and billowed into a pale, drifting mist that rolled toward the beastmen. It settled on their fur and armor like dew, and then the bull warrior who had been hacking at orcs froze, clawing frantically at his back. Others scratched at their necks until blood came. Some scraped their skin with their own axes. The great horned beasts dropped their shields and tore at themselves. The defensive line unraveled in an instant. Chop them down! Bone Tree roared and surged forward. Orc boys leapt into the disordered beastmen, hacking at unguarded backs. One bull warrior tried to clutch his neck as 2 orcs cleaved his knees. He fell and was torn to pieces. Wu watched from the camp's center, eyes wide. He had not expected the greenskins to bring a shaman, still less one who could cast such foul magic. With a violent beat of the raven wings on his back, black feathers snapping in the wind, Wu formed chaos sigils with his hands. Black mist surged from his palms, coalescing overhead. Chaos magic, flock of ravens. His roar carried chaos into the night. Thousands of black ravens, formed from vapor, burst from the cloud. They had razor beaks and talons that gleamed cold. They dove toward the green skins, shrieking. "Look out!" Stone shouted, but it was too late. The ravens descended like a black tide. Beaks ripped through goblin scalps and claws slashed the flesh of orc boys. The attackers lurched into panic. Some swung axes at the winged shadows. Others clutched their heads and ran. Stone ground his teeth, raised the bone staff, and poured the remaining whack into another spell. Magic. Squig frenzy. The squigs gnawing on carcasses lifted their heads. Their eyes bled red, and they emitted manic squeaks. They charged the flock, snapping and swallowing ravens whole. The mist-formed birds dissolved inside their gaping mouths, but there were too many ravens. Squigs were soon overwhelmed. In that clash of magics, neither side gained the clear upper hand. The greenskins' formation was broken by the ravens, and the beastmen's fighting ability was crippled by the itching curse. The battlefield froze into another deadlock. On the eastern flank, where a dense wood edged the field, Kes maneuvered night goblins against a squad of great horned beasts. The beasts had been baited into the trees. The night goblins rode death crawlers, darting between trunks and losing poisoned arrows. The beasts, dull-witted, ran in circles, howling as they failed to catch the skittering goblins. "Watch this!" Kes cried from the largest crawler. He fired an arrow high. His shot was the best among the night goblins. The poisoned bolt sang through the night straight at Wu, who was still directing the ravens. Sensing a murderous intent, Wu twisted. The arrow grazed a raven wing and buried into a nearby tent. Exploding in a gout of flame, the tent ignited. Wu's scarlet eyes fixed on the forest where Kes crouched. Break off of the air, he flapped downward, forced to land. Missed! Kes smacked his crawler in annoyance, relieved that at least he had driven the flying, long-haired monster groundward. Heavy footsteps thundered from the battlefield's center. Wag-Zaga burst from the melee. 7 arrows stuck in his bronze plates. A gash split his back where an orc boy had scored, yet he gripped his axe without faltering and tossed a crushed goblin aside like a rag. He had seen the staff's green light. He had seen Stone. That meant the green-skinned shaman had to die. Kill him, and the attackers might crumble. "Green-skinned shaman, die!" Wag-Zaga roared, the axe planted on his shoulder. He shoved aside 3 orc boys and plowed through the dead. Dark green blood streaked his armor. Each step was a small hill moving across the field as he charged straight for Stone. Stone's pupils tightened. He felt the bull warrior's ferocity, stronger than any beastman he'd met before. Chaos runes on the axe hummed with black energy. He tightened his grip on the bone staff and leaned forward, ready. Orc boys tried to intercept Wogzaga, but were brushed aside with a single swing. Bone Tree lunged, aiming his massive axe at the bull champion's head, but Wogzaga caught the handle of Bone Tree's weapon with his own and shoved him back. Bone Tree bled from the web between thumb and forefinger. "Boss, watch out!" Bone Tree shouted as he tried to break free, but two other bull warriors had him locked. Wogzaga ignored them all, his scarlet eyes fixed on Stone. He lifted his axe, and with a single, furious chop fueled by chaos, aimed to split the shaman in two. Stone stood his ground. He did not dodge. A strange smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. Old rotted-tooth staff flared green, this time far brighter than before. The fighters across the field paused even in their struggle. Goblins forgot to loose arrows, orc boys forgot to strike, and the flock of ravens itself stilled as if waiting for the duel's outcome. The night wind swept up dust, blood, and torn flesh. Wogzaga's axe whistled down through the air, and Stone's staff, glowing a fierce green, rose to meet it. The massive axe, charged with a black chaos wind, came down like a hammer. Stone's pupils narrowed. He gripped Old Rotten-Tooth's staff in his right hand, and every greenskin muscle tensed. Shaman magic, attribute enhancement. A pale green light coursed along the bone staff into his limbs and bones. His arm muscles swelled, his skin toughened into a keratin layer, and his reflexes sharpened several times over. "Bring it on!" Stone roared and advanced instead of retreating. He yanked the cleaver from his back with his left hand, an iron blade he'd forged from raw ore, 3 inches wide and 3 feet long, its edge polished and cold under the moon. He slipped aside from the Wogzaga's huge axe, letting his blade slide down the haft and bite between bronze plates. Clang! Sparks flew. The plate deflected the blade, but not before it cut a deep gash across the Wogzaga's arm. Dark green blood sprayed. The Minotaur howled and swung the axe back. It whistled through the air toward Stone's back. Using his forward momentum, Stone rolled on the ground. The axe smashed into where he had been standing, sending stones flying and leaving a shallow crater. "Greenskin bastard!" Wogzaga bellowed in fury. He hadn't expected this greenskin shaman to use magic and fight so ferociously in close quarters. He raised the axe again and charged, iron hooves shaking the ground with each step. Every strike aimed to finish the fight, sever the greenskin's head, and turn the tide. Stone held his iron cleaver, darting through the axe's arcs with the agility granted by the spell. He knew he couldn't match the Minotaur's raw strength and had to rely on technique. When a cleave missed, a gap opened at the Wogzaga's waist. Stone drove his blade in, only to have it meet the haft. The two weapons locked. The clash of iron and bronze, the thud of muscle on muscle, and the beast's roars made a savage music at the center of the battlefield. The orc boys tensed with their axes. The goblins forgot to loose their arrows, their round eyes widened. Even the squigs stopped gnawing and cocked their heads at the spectacle. The Wogzaga brought his axe down again. Stone couldn't fully evade. The haft jarred his blade from his grip, and it flew free. He used the opening, closing fast and wrapping his arms around the Minotaur's waist. His green muscles flared with brutal strength as he tried to throw the giant down. Wogzaga rammed his horn into Stone's chest. Leather armor snapped with a crack. Pain lanced through Stone's ribs. He nearly coughed up blood. "Die!" the Minotaur roared, pressing a massive hand to Stone's head while arcing the axe toward his neck. At the last instant, Stone twisted his head. The axe grazed his ear and struck the ground. He bit down hard on Wogzaga's arm. Greenskin teeth were sharper than a beast's and tore into bronze and flesh. A chunk of bloody meat came away. "Ow!" the Minotaur screamed. The hand on Stone's head loosened. Stone lunged for his cleaver on the ground, scrambled to his feet, and seized it with both hands. As the great beast bent forward, Stone drove the blade upward, fueled by his shamanic magic. Pfft! The cleaver, imbued with greenskin power, sliced through the Wogzaga's cervical spine. Dark green blood spurted like a fountain. Stone chopped again and again. The Minotaur's head tumbled free, eyes wide with ferocious disbelief. The massive body swayed and crashed, shaking the surrounding corpses. Stone panted, chest heaving. His leather armor hung in tatters, exposing a hard, scarred green torso, rib cage bruised from the horn strike, arms and back carved by deep wounds that revealed bone beneath. Blood ran down the grooves of his muscles, but he stood. He picked up the Wagzaga's head and raised it high, roaring into the night toward the greenskins around him. Whack! 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 The greenskins exploded. The orc boys raised their axes and cheered, their voices shaking the trees and rattling leaves. The goblins leapt and shouted, "Boss is awesome!" Chop up the long-haired monsters. Night goblins on death crawlers circled the field, letting loose poisoned volleys at the remaining beastmen. Gretchen brandished wooden sticks and joined the chanting, faces alight with fanatic joy. Their morale bolstered, the greenskins charged the remaining beastmen like a frenzy of wolves. The long stalemate snapped. Orc axes felled Ungor with a single blow. Goblin spears found throats. Squigs tore at fallen bodies. The entire central camp became a slaughter. From within the smoke and carnage, Wu watched, rage splitting his face. He had gathered over 200 soldiers when he saw Stone hoist the Minotaur's head. A heavy weight landed in his chest like an axe. There was no time to mourn. From the city walls of Katushir came a thunderous cheer. He looked up and saw human soldiers waving in his direction, faces puzzled yet bright with relief. On the front lines, Kelisal's silver-white armor had darkened with blood. Her sword was nicked, but she held the wall. The city's defenders were fewer than 500, the militia nearly wiped out. Even Lord Iceville stood in armor on the wall, sword in hand. But when they spotted the greenskins cutting through the beastmen and Stone high with the Minotaur's skull, they erupted. Whoever these greenskins were, they had come to help Katushir. "Reinforcements! Reinforcements!" a soldier shouted, relief raw in his voice. Morale on the wall flipped. Men who had been on the brink found a second wind and began striking back at the beastmen besieging the city. The frontline beastmen, already exhausted, were pushed back. Wu knew the breach was lost. The central army was collapsing, the Wagzaga dead, and the humans on the walls counterattacking. Losses were already catastrophic. Continuing would mean annihilation. "Damn greenskins! Damn humans!" he snarled, crimson compound eyes flashing with unwillingness. Still, he steeled himself. "Sound the horn! Retreat!" he barked to a messenger. "Tell the frontline troops to abandon the siege and fall back toward the central army." The retreat horn blared across the field. Beastmen attacking the walls scattered, dropping weapons to flee toward the center. The human soldiers on the battlements did not pursue. They leaned against the stone, exhausted, watching the beasts break and run with faces full of gratitude for the reprieve. The greenskins gave them no mercy. Stone set down the Minotaur's head and led the orc boys in a hunting charge at the fleeing beastmen. Riding the furball, he bellowed across the distance toward Wu. "Long-haired monsters, if you've got guts, come duel me. See if I don't chop your bird head off." Wu, counting survivors, felt rage flare at the provocation. He had seen Stone kill the Wagzaga. That greenskin's magic was uncanny, and his close combat deadly. Dueling him would be folly. "Ignore him. Retreat now," Wu ordered. He tallied his forces. Just over 300 soldiers pulled back from the front, about 200 remained in the center, fewer than 700 in all. The flank army was destroyed, the Wagzaga dead, and supplies, prisoners, and spoils lost to the greenskins. He made a grim decision. "Send 300 Ungor and Gors to cover the retreat," he said. "The rest follow me. Break out toward the northwest forest." Over 300 older or weaker soldiers were shoved forward with crude weapons in a desperate covering charge. Better to die charging than be torn apart. Wu and fewer than 700 elites abandoned the supplies and slaughtered the captives to silence them, then fled toward the howling forest in the northwest. Stone grinned at the covering beasts. "Chop them up, don't leave a one." The orc boys swarmed like wolves and cut down the 300 cover troops as if slicing melons. At the edge of the northwest woods, Kess had waited with his night goblins. Having received Stone's orders, he'd bypassed the beastmen's breakout route and hidden in the forest's undergrowth with more than 200 night goblins mounted on death crawlers. "They're coming," Kess hissed, lowering his voice as the goblins readied. Wu hurled his survivors into the trees. No sooner had they caught their breath than poisoned arrows thudded from the bushes. The dozen or so great horned beasts leading the column were struck. The poison worked instantly, and they screamed as they convulsed and fell. "Enemy attack! Greenskins!" Wu shouted, but it was too late. Night goblins surged from the undergrowth on crawling mounts. Some shot poisoned arrows. Others used spider silk to tangle necks. Some rammed the beasts with their death crawlers. The crawlers' chelicerae ripped flesh and dragged men into the brambles to be strangled. The forest turned the beastmen clumsy. Many were poisoned and died in agony. Others were entangled and choked alive. Some plunged into pits hidden with sharpened stakes. Wu and his survivors fled, but their numbers dwindled. By the time they burst out of the wood, the force that had numbered over 700 had been whittled to fewer than 500. Listening to screams that still echoed from within, Wu's eyes burned. "Blackrock tribe, greenskin shaman, I remember you," he snarled. "One day I will bring a chaos host and rip you apart." With that, he led what remained deeper into the forest and vanished into the night. Outside Catastrophe, the greenskins pillaged the spoils. Orc boys hefted axes and looted bodies. Goblins stuffed food and ironware into their arms. Night goblins dragged captured siege equipment on their crawlers. The Gretchen toddled behind Stone, carrying the Wogzaga's head like a prize. Stone stood in the center of the ruined field, smiling as he looked toward the black feather wood. Though Wu had escaped, the Blackrock tribe had slaughtered most of the 3,000 or so beastmen and captured much booty. More importantly, Catastrophe now owed the Blackrock tribe a favor. On the distant city wall, Lord Iceville and Falole watched the celebrating greenskins below. Lord Iceville frowned, voice threaded with complex feeling. "These are the reinforcements you mentioned? Greenskins?" Falole smiled. "Yes, the Blackrock tribe is the strongest greenskin faction in the Howling Forest right now." Lord Iceville fell silent and studied the greenskin chieftain holding the Minotaur's skull. For the first time, he felt a different understanding of the savage race. Stone, sensing eyes upon him, looked up at the wall, raised the skull, and roared another triumphing, long whack! The soldiers on the battlements, though they did not fully understand, cheered back. No matter what else, these greenskins had helped save Catastrophe. As night deepened, bonfires lit the battlefield, and the greenskins celebrated their bloody victory. The clamor of battle slowly faded. By the time Stone picked his way through the bodies toward Catastrophe, the morning sun had climbed high and turned into a fierce midday glare. The winter wind still carried an edge of cold, but the warm light washed most of it away, leaving a faint heat on the skin. Even so, sunlight couldn't sweep away the thick smell of blood that hung in the air. A choking blend of dark green beastman gore, deep red human blood, and the pale green of greenskin viscera. It clung to everything and made his throat tighten. Stone walked alone over the churned ground, which squelched underfoot. His vision was a layered landscape of corpses, mostly beastmen. Some split down the middle, organs and dark green blood spilled on the earth. Some chewed down to grinning bone by squigs, scraps of flesh clinging to the joints. Others twisted by chaos sorcery, limbs bent at grotesque angles, their faces frozen in the fanaticism of their last moments. He kicked aside the curled-up body of an Ungor and stared at its warped goat skull. Warpstone had poisoned these creatures over generations. Goat-headed, human-bodied, patchy fur, taloned hands. Every inch of them shouted, "Not human." Perhaps long ago they'd been ordinary animals, or men. The Warpstone turned them into outcasts. "What a pity," Stone murmured, then shook his head. Once beastmen raised great axes to plunder villages and laid humans down as sacrificial offerings to their dark gods, they passed beyond being merely victims. Chaos had already twisted them into monsters. Arson, murder, looting, ritual slaughter of infants to please otherworldly gods. There was no forgiveness for that. He remembered a chaos legend from a TikTok in his previous life and sneered. Of all the things to believe in, they picked those 4 interdimensional hawkers. To greenskins, the 4 chaos gods were just meddlesome salesmen, promising power to turn folk into anti-civilized lunatics. "Better to believe in Gork and Mork with me," they said. "At least fighting's fun, and if you die, you get to go to Valhalla and keep choppin'." A gust carried scraps of flesh by, and Stone's gaze drifted across the field where greenskin bodies lay. Burly orc boys still clutched iron axes, many with fatal gashes from bull warriors' great blades. Goblin spearmen were riddled with arrows, their thin bodies slumped beside long spears and half-eaten dried mushrooms clutched in small fingers. Night goblins' death crawlers had their spider legs severed, riders long dead, but quivers of poisoned arrows still bulged by ruined saddles. Stone knelt and brushed the blood off one orc boy's face. The boys had been called Ironhead and had joined the Blackrock tribe 3 months ago. He used to bang his head on trees, boasting he wanted a skull as hard as Gork's. Now Ironhead's eyes were closed, but the corners of his mouth were slightly upturned. There was no pain, only a strange serenity. Not just Ironhead. Many fallen greenskins wore smiles or quiet contentment, not the feral rage of beastmen nor the terror of human soldiers. It looked as if they were merely sleeping and about to spring up again with a shout of "Wag!" The sight warmed Stone's chest. For greenskins, dying in battle wasn't tragedy. They grew on stories. Gork, the strongest fighter, and Mork, the craftiest goblin, both in Valhalla among piled weapons and mushrooms, forever fighting, drinking, and looting. A warrior who died on the field went straight to that endless fight, far better than gnawing mushrooms and scavenging in the tribe. "Rest easy," Stone said, patting Ironhead's shoulder. "When you get to Valhalla, remember to help me chop up a few more of Gork's enemies." He didn't have to give orders. Gretchen and goblins were already at work hauling bodies. They carried their fallen on wooden planks, some lashed with vines, some shouldered, humming off-key greenskin war songs. The dead wouldn't be left. By Blackrock custom, greenskin corpses were buried in the mushroom field. Their flesh and blood fed the fungi, making stronger, tastier fight mushrooms, and their bones were gathered by the great ancient to be forged into weapons or tools. The dead returned to the tribe that way, becoming part of it and still fighting, never truly gone. By late afternoon, the field was mostly cleared. The greenskins, loaded with spoils and the plates of their dead, marched back toward the howling forest. Stone did not follow. He dusted himself off and headed for Catushir's north gate. Blood streaks still stained the city walls. Fragments of griffin armor, broken arrow shafts, and dark smears of congealed gore caught the sunlight. The gate itself was closed, and the walls bristled with soldiers. Dozens of longbows were leveled at him, strings pulled taut, arrowheads glinting. One step closer, and a shaft storm would fall. Stone stopped and grinned. How amusing. To defend the city, they were called savages. The Blackrock tribe had lost hundreds, and he, their chieftain, had cut down the bull warriors and repelled the beastmen. Yet before he'd even wiped the worst of the blood from his face, he stood accused. He understood. Centuries of hatred between humans and greenskins didn't end with one battle. To human eyes, greenskins were ravening monsters who stole, burned, and killed. Beastmen were like a cancer. Meeting them meant death. Stone thought the analogies fit. Beastmen brought destruction like a blazing plague. Greenskins were a constant, aggravating infestation. Neither looked good to human sensibilities. He stood watching the soldiers. Some gripped their bows with nervous hands. Others spat curses. Greenskin scum, their faces hard with loathing. A few looked conflicted as they watched the goblins carrying away their dead. The sunlight fell across Stone and drew a long green shadow. His leather armor still dripped, his iron blades smeared with dark green blood. The trophy he'd once slung over his shoulder, the head of Wagzaga, had already been stripped off by the goblins, leaving only empty straps. Still, he stood like an unmovable hill. Alone, he kept the archers from relaxing by an inch. "Hey," he called up to the wall, voice booming. "Where's your lord? I helped chase off those long-haired monsters. Ain't I owed a cup of ale?" The men on the battlements exchanged looks. No one answered. They didn't know how to treat this reinforcement. Friend or foe? He'd saved the city, but he was greenskin. Before they could decide, footsteps approached from the arrow tower above the gate. Silasel appeared, perched on a white griffin-mounted warhorse. Her silver armor had been wiped, though telltale scratches remained. Golden hair was tied back, and in her hand she held a knight's sword, its edge nicked from combat. Her gaze rested on Stone, all at once appraising and unreadable. He was a greenskin chieftain, green skin, blood-splattered leathers, eyes sharp with ferocity, and it had been him and his brutal companions who'd charged out at a vital moment and driven the beastmen back. What do you want? Celestial's voice was cool and clear, stripped of the hostility it had earlier. Stone smiled and tapped his belly. I'm hungry. We fought all night. Don't you owe us something to eat? And so many of my brothers died. Don't the Blackrock tribe deserve some compensation? Greenskins never dealt at a loss. Helping Catastrophe hadn't been charity. It had been for loot, for the tribe's name, and for the trade route Feluole had promised. Now that the fight was won, they expected pay. The word compensation set the soldiers abuzz. Greedy, some spat. Why should we give them anything? Others muttered. A few feared it was a ploy to storm the gate. Kelisal raised a hand and silenced them. She studied Stone for a long moment, then said, Wait, I'll go report to the Lord. She turned her mount and disappeared behind the tower. Stone remained where he was, facing the drawn bows. The sun was still warm and the blood smell still thick, but his mood had lightened. He knew the folk of Catastrophe wouldn't dare let him be shot. Without the Blackrock tribe, if the beastmen returned, the city would fall. From the direction of the mushroom field came the high, raucous singing of goblins celebrating. Stone looked up as if he could see his dead comrades already in Valhalla with Gork and Mork, faces serene as on the field. He grinned and made a rude face at the soldiers above. Many ground their teeth in anger, but none of them dared loose their arrows. Lower your bows. Do you want to die, you small fry? A hoarse roar split the edge of the battlefield. Scarface stormed forward, leading dozens of greenskins. He had just finished ordering the Gretchen to haul the loot, and when he turned, he saw the humans on the city wall pointing arrows at his boss. Fury flared in an instant. These greenskins had crawled out of bloody combat. Beast blood still stained their iron axes, torn muscles showed through cracked leather armor, and the ferocity in their eyes was like a poisoned blade. The young soldiers on the wall trembled, their hands shaking on the bowstrings. Stone lifted a hand to stop Scarface. He knew the humans were mostly bluffing. The defenders looked exhausted, armor battered, bowstrings quivering from being taught for too long. Where would they find the strength to fight? Before Scarface could curse, heavy footsteps sounded from the arrow tower above the gate. Lord Iceville appeared in a set of black, ruby-inlaid armor, flanked by more than a dozen shield-bearers. The shields formed a protective wall around him. His hand rested on the saber at his hip, his voice rough from battle. Greenskin Chieftain, he called, fixing Stone with a hard look. You bring this many. What do you want? Nothing. Stone grinned and pointed at the bows on the wall. I chased off those long-haired monsters for you, and this is how you thank reinforcements. Point bows at my head? Lord Iceville motioned to his men. The long bows on the wall slowly lowered but stayed at the ready. He studied Stone, tone guarded. Who are you? Why would you help Catastrophe? I am Stone, boss of the Blackrock tribe. Stone patted his chest. It was your man Feluole who invited me here. He shifted, the unmistakable greed of a greenskin shining in his eyes. We didn't come for charity. We chased off those long-haired brutes, and we lost over 100 brothers. We want compensation. Lord Iceville had expected demands, though not such bluntness. He kept his voice low. What do you want? Money. Stone held up a finger, blunt and decisive. 100,000 imperial gold coins. A shout rose from the wall. 100,000 imperial gold coins? Even if Catastrophe sold every shop, it wouldn't raise that much. Lord Iceville's face darkened. His hand tightened on the sword at his hip. Greenskin Chieftain, you ask for the moon. Asking for the moon? Stone scoffed and gestured at the battlefield. Over 100 of my brothers died. We smashed your archenemy, Wagzaga, drove off more than 3,000 long-haired monsters, and helped defend the city. 100,000 is a bargain. His voice turned edged. If you won't pay, I'll march my men into the city now and take our compensation by force. Lord Iceville's expression went colder. He knew this was a threat. But Catastrophe had no strength left to resist. The city defense had taken more than 50% casualties. The knightly order had fewer than 200 left, and the militia had lost thousands. Fewer than 500 could still pick up a weapon. If the greenskins attacked, the city would be crushed. 50,000, Iceville ground out. Catastrophe can only produce 50,000 gold coins now. 50,000? Too little, Scarface barked. We lost so many. We need at least 90. I said 100,000, Stone snapped at Scarface. then turned back to Ascaville and softened slightly. But since you just finished fighting a war, I can be reasonable. He counted on his fingers. If you can't pay all the gold, you can pay in goods, grain, ironware, and orc prisoners. Lord Ascaville's eyes lit up. As a trade fortress, Catouchier still had goods in its warehouses: silk, spices, ironware. Not enough to cover everything, but enough to make up part. They also held many captured greenskins from previous skirmishes who could be handed over. He considered and said, 60,000 gold coins, and the rest in goods and prisoners. We have about 300 prisoners and goods including 150 bolts of silk, 200 caddies of spice, 600 caddies of pig iron. This was profit locked in. Stone grinned. Fine. It's settled. Bring the goods and prisoners to the north gate at noon tomorrow. I'll inspect them, then my brothers and I will leave. Ascaville inclined his head and stepped back into the arrow tower. He watched the greenskins fade away with the loot, a flicker of malice in his eyes. These greenskins were powerful and greedy. Keeping them nearby was a danger. He summoned a retainer privately. Send a squad of scouts to follow them and find out where their tribe is, he ordered. The retainer left at once. Ascaville stood in the tower and watched the greenskins disappear into the distance, promising himself that once Catouchier recovered, he would find a way to eliminate the Blackrock tribe. At noon the next day, the north gate opened. 300 orc prisoners shuffled out in a line, necks tied with ropes. Most were ragged, some bearing fresh wounds, eyes glazed with numbness. Captured from scattered small tribes, they had been held in the city and surely hadn't expected to be handed over as payment. Soldiers escorted them, spears ready, wary of a sudden riot. Bonetree and a dozen orc boys met them at the gate. Bonetree yanked the ropes hard. The prisoners stumbled and fell, but none dared resist. Bonetree grinned and shouted to his boys, "Take these fellas back. Give them a proper training so they know the rules of the Blackrock tribe." The orc boys roared and drove the prisoners toward the howling forest like livestock. At the same time, Catouchier's soldiers began moving the compensation, 10 heavy wooden chests of gold, their lids opened to spill glittering light that made the greenskins' eyes go wide. Silk and spices were stacked on planks, a rich aroma drifting from them. Iron swords were bundled together, cold and bright. Stone personally inspected the goods, counted, and, seeing the quantities matched, nodded to Scarface. "Load it up." The greenskins surged forward, some carrying chests, others shouldering bolts of silk or hugging iron swords, shouting excitedly, "Looting time," as they headed back to the tribe. This payout would nearly drain Catouchier. These gold coins were the city's last reserve. The silk and spices were bound for southern merchants. The iron swords were the defense force's backups. After this, Catouchier would need decades to recover. Stone walked at the rear. He looked back at Catouchier's walls and smiled, cunning and satisfied. He had expected Ascaville wouldn't be content to leave it at that. Greenskin instinct was sharp, and the way Ascaville had watched him yesterday, like a wolf eyeing fat meat, promised trouble. Sure enough, that night 3 scouts in black moved carefully through the trees at the edge of the howling forest, trailing the greenskins' tracks. Their steps were light, knives in hand, eyes vigilant. Ascaville had ordered them to confirm the tribe's location and, if possible, map the route. "Hurry up, stay silent, don't get seen," the lead scout whispered. He took a step and suddenly the ground gave way beneath the leaf litter. Hidden spider silk sprang up. "Oh no!" The scout tried to pull back, but it was too late. Spider silk wrapped his ankle and yanked him into the air. Before the other two could help, a dozen night goblins burst from the bushes on death crawlers, ropes and daggers in hand. "Catch them! Don't let them get away!" Kez barked. The night goblins were swift. They circled behind the scouts, bound them with hemp rope as the death crawlers pressed pincers to their throats. Kez, riding the biggest crawler, slit open their nightclothes with a dagger and sneered. "You tried to follow us? Bold move." He winked at the others. "The boss said if anyone dared, we should give them a proper welcome." The goblins chuckled, stripped the 3 scouts bare, leaving only their shoes, tied them up with spider silk like dumplings, hoisted them onto the death crawlers, and rode toward Catouchier. The next morning, a thumping at the north gate woke the guards. The soldier opened it and froze. 3 naked men, wrapped in spider silk and leaves, lashed to the door panel. They were the missing scouts. The guards dragged them inside and brought them before Lord Iceville. Iceville stared at his utterly humiliated scouts, face livid. His elite scouts had been stripped and dumped at the gate, an affront. Blackrock tribe, stone, he ground out, eyes burning. Only now did he realize these greenskins were not just fierce, they were cunning too. Removing them would be harder than he'd imagined. Deep in the Blackrock tribe's howling forest camp, Stone sat on a stone stool in the mushroom garden and laughed as Kez reported. Well done. Let that old human know the Blackrock tribe's territory isn't for trespassers. Bone Tree stood nearby with his massive axe and said in a gruff voice, Boss, should we take the boys and sack Catastrophe? We could grab the rest of the gold. No rush. Stone waved him off, eyes calculating. Catastrophe still has uses. We'll train those prisoners, enjoy the loot, then go back and demand more. Sunlight filtered through the leaves onto Stone's face. He watched the orc boys training in the distance and the piles of plunder stacked in the warehouse and smiled with satisfaction. The Battle of Catastrophe had made the Blackrock tribe richer and secured its name across the howling forest. 99. A dwarf girl? The bonfires of the Blackrock tribe burned for 3 days and 3 nights. The greenskins paraded the spoils they'd claimed from Catastrophe and stuffed the tribe's storehouses to bursting. Imperial gold coins clinked in oak barrels, bolts of silk and piles of spices formed their own little mountains, and even the squigs brazenly stole strands of silk to wrap around their heads. 300 orc captives were penned in a temporary corral and disciplined by Bone Tree and the veterans. They were roused at dawn to practice chopping and lifting stones. Those who refused got the whip. In only 3 days, the stunned numbness in the captives vanished, replaced by a hard, brutal vigor that only greenskins possessed. Shito had been nonstop busy. Each morning he took Great Ancient to catalog the ironware, watched the captives drill in the corral at noon, and handed out fresh beast meat to the squigs in the afternoon. At night, he sat on a stone stool in the mushroom garden, stroking Furball and tapping through the system panel to figure out how to spend his wok points. A system notification had popped up the day they returned. Catastrophe Campaign Judgment, Strategic Advantage. Reward, 579 wok points. Unlock Hero Slot 1. Allows talented greenskins to be promoted to Hero Unit. Shito had immediately reserved the hero slot for Bone Tree. He'd been with him a long time, swinging a great axe and holding the line against the bull warriors. If Bone Tree hadn't steadied the orc boys in that last bloody clash of the Central Army, Shito might not have killed Wog Zaga. Once this rush is over, I'll promote Bone Tree, Shito murmured, rubbing Furball, his eyes on Bone Tree, drilling the captives in the distance. Bone Tree swung his great axe in a wide arc toward a lazy, slumped orc captive. The blade nicked the man's scalp and sank into the earth, and the captive leapt up and smashed a nearby wooden stake with a stick in a fury. On the morning of the 4th day, Shito finally had a free moment. He took Kess and 2 orc boys and went to the dungeon carved into the western side of the tribe's territory. The dungeon was hewn from black rock, its entrance hidden beneath an old oak. Inside it was dark and damp, with only faint rays of light filtering through ventilation holes in the ceiling. Busy with the spoils, he hadn't taken the time to inspect the prisoners properly. Boss, it stinks in there. I'll help with the smell. Kess pinched his nose and pushed open the heavy stone door. A wave of reek, blood, mold, and animal stink hit them. Furball leaped from Shito's arms, baring its teeth and growling into the darkness. The dungeon had 3 levels. The top level held a dozen surviving beastmen, the ones captured in earlier fights. An Ungor with broken legs moaned, a blind gore beast groped the walls, and an Angor beast with half a bitten-off arm clung to the stone. They were all chained to the walls. When they saw Shito, they let out hoarse roars, crimson eyes burning with killing intent, but their injuries kept them down. These are useless, Shito said with a frown. The squigs can have extra rations tomorrow. He moved on to the middle level. The middle level housed over 100 human women, taken in beastmen raids on villages and towns. The greenskins had captured them before the beastmen could finish them. Huddled in a corner, they trembled when they saw Shito's green skin, some covering their faces and weeping. Stop crying, Shito's voice snapped. We don't kill women. In a few days, we'll send you to Catastrophe. Someone will find you a way to live. Faluole of the Golden Rose Merchant Guild had already sent word asking for help to rescue these captives. The guild was low on manpower. Taking the women in would earn favor and, perhaps more importantly, secure some good wine. The women dared not speak, only lifting wary faces to the scarred green-skinned chieftain, eyes full of fear and confusion. Shito said nothing more and went down to the lowest level. The bottom level was the darkest, given only a single vent. Kes struck a torch. In the flickering light, Shito saw a small figure curled in the corner. No human, no beastman, but a dwarf in tattered iron armor. A dwarf, too? Shito raised an eyebrow and stepped forward. The dwarf lifted her head. In the torchlight, Shito could see her. Dark gray skin, unlike the pale tone of ordinary dwarfs, blood-red eyes like quenched iron, two small fangs at the corners of her mouth. Her face wasn't savage so much as stubborn. Her black hair was braided into two thick plaits. Though her armor was worn, complex runes were engraved in the iron, and a small iron hammer was clutched in her hand. A chaos dwarf? Shito muttered. These were the dwarf traders, twisted by chaos, gray-skinned, red-eyed worshippers of Hashut, skillful smiths and vicious enemies. But this one appeared to be a woman. "Don't come closer," she barked, raising her hammer. Her voice was hoarse but fierce. "One more step and I'll smash your head!" "Smash my head?" Shito grinned and crouched down. "With that little hammer of yours?" The dwarf ground her teeth but didn't swing. She knew she couldn't best this goblin. Shito was still a goblin after all. Twice her height, muscled like iron, eyes hard as any beastman's. Kez called over. "Boss, she's a chaos dwarf. We found her in a beastman's tent when we were cleaning up the spoils, was hammering a horseshoe." Shito nodded and asked, "What's your name? Why were you captured by the beastman?" The dwarf hesitated. Seeing escape was impossible. She lowered her hammer slowly. "My name's Gujana Huangti. I was the blacksmith for a chaos dwarf merchant caravan. We came to the Blackfeather Forest to trade for warpstone, but Wu's herd attacked. The caravan scattered. I was taken." "Why capture you instead of killing you?" Shito asked. Beastmen were bloodthirsty and seldom left survivors. Chaos dwarfs, also twisted by chaos, would seem likely sacrifices. A flash of hatred passed over Gujana's face. "I can blacksmith," she said. "They needed me to mend battering rams and sharpen axes, so they kept me. But they killed my uncle, the caravan captain, because he refused to give them the warpstone." Her knuckles whitened on the hammer. "I hate those long-haired monsters." Shito's eyes brightened. She could smith? The Blackrock tribe desperately needed a proper smith. Bone Tree could fashion crude iron axes and swords, but his work was rough and chips quickly. The orc boys only knew how to beat iron with rocks, making gear even the Gretchen scorned. If Guzana could teach them real forging, the tribe's weapons and armor could leap forward. "You can blacksmith?" Shito leaned in, eager. "Can you forge axes? Armor?" Guzana blinked, surprised a greenskin cared. Pride edged her reply. "I've worked the forge with my uncle since I was 10. Chaos dwarf techniques are 10 times better than human smithing. Give me ore and I can make axes that split stone and armor that stops arrows." "Good." Shito slapped his thigh and stood up. "I'll give you a way out. Don't rot in this dungeon. Come with me. Help me at the forge. Teach my orc boys." Guzana frowned. "Why should I? I'm a chaos dwarf. Why serve a greenskin?" "Because you're my captive." Shito's voice was flat but firm. "You help me smith and you get meat and wine. Or you stay here and tomorrow I throw you to the squigs for them to gnaw you to the bone." He paused, adding, "Besides, we greenskins hate those beastmen too. If you help make better weapons, we'll kill more long-haired monsters. Think of it as revenge for your uncle." Gujana's body trembled. Revenge was a dream she'd clung to, but alone she was powerless. If these greenskins could be made into a force with stronger weapons, they might actually slay the beastmen. She was silent a long moment, then lifted her red eyes to Shito. "I'll help you smith and teach your orc boys, but promise me, if we meet Wu's herd again, you'll bring me. I want to cut that Ravenwing commander down myself." "No problem," Shito agreed with a grin. "Forge well and forget killing beastmen. If you want to kill the chaos gods themselves, I'll hand you the axe." Gujana let out a small, wary laugh, greenskin boasting, but it eased her. She rose and brushed the grime from her armor, still clutching her hammer. "I'll come, but if you betray me, I'll risk everything to smash your head. Don't worry, I don't betray someone who can smith. Shito nodded to Kes. Unlock her chains, take her to the blacksmith, and feed her. Kes cut the chains. Guzana stretched stiff limbs and followed him up. Passing the middle level, she halted, looking at the huddled women, then back at Shito. We won't hurt them, Shito reassured her at once. We don't kill women. We'll send them somewhere safe in a few days. Guzana said nothing and climbed out into the daylight. She paused at the dungeon mouth and glanced back at the dark hollow, then out across the tribe in the sun. The battle mushrooms in the mushroom garden towered over a man. Orc boys drilled in the open, and squigs chased each other across the grass. It was still crude and barbaric, but it had the spark of life the dungeon lacked. Shito watched her go, a smile tugging at his lips. He'd struck gold. A Chaos Dwarf smith could become the Blackrock tribe's prized blacksmith. He stroked Furball and headed for the forge. He needed to find iron ore fast, so Guzana could show what she could do. Deep in the dungeon, the beastmen still roared and the human women still sobbed, but change was already quietly underway in the Blackrock tribe. The arrival of a Chaos Dwarf, the promise of iron axes soon to be forged, and the first hammer blows to come were another solid stepping stone on the tribe's rise. Far away in the howling forest, Black Feather Commander Wu tended his wounded beastmen. Lord Iceville of Catastrophe fretted over his recovery. Filuole's Golden Rose Merchant Guild prepared to take in the rescued women. And in the Blackrock tribe, the sound of hammers would soon ring out, reshaping their fate. A hint of early spring warmth rode the wind through the howling forest and into the Blackrock tribe. A month had passed since the bloody battle of Catastrophe. The wooden palisade at the tribe's edge had been pushed out another half-mile. Smoke curled from new orc boys' barracks. The squigs in their pen had grown rounder, and the battle mushrooms in the field now stood taller than a man. But the sight that pleased the greenskins most was the goat pen on the eastern side of the encampment. Stone stood outside the fence, watching the packed herd with a grin that nearly split his face. These goats had been snatched as kids from a human caravan 3 years ago and fattened on mushroom dregs and shredded meat by goblins. Now their numbers had swollen past 500. Their gray-black wool shone, their horns curled like little crescent moons, and some of the rams were strong enough to arm wrestle a Gretchen. Only 100. Stone slapped the fence hard. The goats bleated and jumped. Bone Tree, bring 20 orc boys, pick the strongest rams, and slaughter them this afternoon. Bone Tree, drilling prisoners nearby, dropped his great axe and ran over. After a month of training, the 300 orc prisoners had already been folded into the tribe. They were lifting stones with the veterans now, and their eyes lit up at the word slaughter. Greenskins could get by on photosynthesis, but who didn't love meat? The order swept through the tribe like wildfire. Goblins peered at the goats, squigs bounced off to gather firewood, and even the orc boys Guzana had been teaching to blacksmith were sharpening their axes, eager for the feast. The busiest place was the Green Mushroom Tavern at the tribe's center. Built 6 months earlier, a wooden house with a mushroom cap roof and a crooked sign branded by Skinny Pole, Green Mushroom Tavern. It was chaos inside. Skinny Pole crouched by a wine vat, plucking at his bristled chin. The mushroom wine Stone wanted had to be hauled up from the cellar. The black mushroom spirits sat in rough pottery jars, so strong a sip could set an orc quivering. The screaming green mushroom wine was even worse. Pale green, brewed from fresh screaming mushrooms, and the jars emitted a squeaking cry when shaken. One spill and the whole tavern would be screaming for a night. Hurry up, move it! Skinny Pole banged the cellar door with a ladle, barking orders to a dozen goblin lads. The boss wants 100 jars of black mushroom spirits, 50 jars of screaming green wine. Move 'em tonight. The goblin lads scurried into the dim cellar, the air thick with the spicy, heady smell of mushroom wine. One lad bumped a jar. The green wine jar swayed and gave a high, shrill squeak. He yelped so loudly he nearly dropped it. The back kitchen was an even wilder scene. Chubby bustled around the stove. He was responsible for the roasted mushrooms, dried fish, and the looted flatbreads from Catastrophe. Battle mushroom caps were sliced and brushed with orc fat before roasting. Fish caught from forest streams were sun-dried for half a month, then softened in mushroom wine before the fire. Flatbreads had to be crisp outside and soft inside. "Flour! Where's my flour?" Chubby roared, spatula flashing dangerously. "If the white flatbreads from Katushir get burnt, I'll pull off all your ears." Goblins sloshed water on mushrooms, flipped the fish, brushed oil on flatbreads. Smoke and aromas curled out the tavern, drawing passing squigs to circle and drool. As Stone passed, he watched Skinny Pole herding wine jars and Chubby stomping like a small volcano, and couldn't help grinning. "Do a good job. Let the brothers drink their fill tonight." Both Skinny Pole and Chubby nodded eagerly, though inside they groaned. Over 100 goats to roast, 100 jars to haul, pounds of mushrooms and fish to prepare, they wouldn't sleep that night. But no one dared complain. For greenskins, a feast ordered by the boss ranked higher than battle. They loved to eat not merely from hunger. Stone settled on a stone bench in the mushroom field, Furball dozing in his arms, and glanced at the greenskin physiology analysis on his system panel. Greenskins were different from most creatures. They didn't need 3 square meals a day like humans, nor were they as dependent on flesh as beastmen. So long as they had water and sunlight, their skin, riddled with countless tiny spores, could photosynthesize, converting light into enough energy to walk, fight, and steal. But when injured, those spores flicked on. They secreted a hormone laced with chaotic energy that accelerated cell division and drove astonishingly fast healing. That hormone burned energy, though, and had to be replenished with food. The more a greenskin ate, the more energy they had, the more hormone the spores secreted, and the faster the wounds closed. Bone Tree's shoulder wound from the last battle, an axe blow that had bared bone, had closed fast after 3 jars of black mushroom spirits and half a roasted wild boar. That was the spores at work. Stronger greenskins carried more spores. Orc boys had far more than goblins. Gretchen almost none. That was why orcs shrugged off brutal injuries while Gretchen could be laid up by a scratch. Some old orcs could even regenerate lost limbs if they had enough meat and wine. A severed arm could grow back, albeit sometimes a bit smaller. So the stronger you were, the more you loved to eat. Stone had a personal example. After killing Wog Zaga, he devoured a whole roasted ram and downed 5 jars of black mushroom spirits. The long bruise on his chest had vanished the next morning. Feasting after a major battle had become a Blackrock custom. It helped the brothers recover quickly and kept spirits high. For greenskins, happiness was simple: fighting or gnawing meat and drinking strong spirits. Better yet, both at the same time. This feast was to be grand. Over 100 whole roasted goats, 100 jars of mushroom wine, dried fish, roasted mushrooms, and looted flatbreads, the biggest the Blackrock tribe had ever seen. Stone had pictured himself at the head of the table, sipping wine while Bone Tree bragged about Wagzaga and Guzana showed off a keen new iron axe. But 2 days into preparations, his head throbbed. He woke to Great Ancient blocking the tent flap, holding a crooked iron ingot. "Boss, we're out of iron ore. Guzana says to temper chaos iron she needs more warpstone, only 3 pieces left." Stone rubbed his eyes and waved a hand. "Send Kez with the night goblins to the Black Feather Forest. The last time Wagzaga's horde fled that way, there's bound to be warpstone." No sooner had Great Ancient gone than Scarface skidded up, clutching a tattered sheet with scrawled circles. "Boss, goblins at the Yadu outpost say a small beastman group's creeping near. Should we send orc boys to cut him down?" Yadu was the outpost captured last month, east of the Howling Forest, and held by over 200 goblins. Ironhold sat west, a ruined human fortress with 50 orcs posted by Bone Tree. Both needed constant attention. "Send 20 orc boys," Stone said. "Cut them down and hang their heads on the outpost gate." Skinny Pole and Chubby arrived together, one frantic, the other sweating. "Boss, half the jars in the cellar are cracked. They can't hold that much wine." Skinny Pole tugged at his beard. "Boss, not enough roasting racks. We have 100 goats and only 10 racks. We won't finish till morning." Chubby clutched his gut. Stone took a breath. "Skinny Pole, send the Gretchen to the river to gather clay and make jars. They don't have to be perfect. A little leak'll just give the brothers something to lick." "Chubby, tell the orc boys to build roasting racks with iron bars. 20 racks. If that's not enough, tear down the palisade and use the wood." They ran off. Stone was about to sip mushroom wine when a Gretchen stumbled in, bawling, "Boss! Squigs in the pen fought over food and broke the fence. 3 squigs ran away." "What?" Stone sprang up. Furball leapt from his arms, teeth bared. Squigs were treasures. The loss of one stung. Stone followed the Gretchen to the pen and found a gap in the fence and tracks where squig bodies had rolled across the earth. 3 orc boys stamped about the hole while the rest of the squigs kept fighting over scraps, oblivious to their escaped kin. "What are you standing there for? Chase 'em," Stone barked. "Let Furball smell the trail. They can't have gone far." Furball sniffed the ground, whimpered toward the forest, and bolted. The 3 orc boys followed in a rush. Stone looked at the broken wood and snapped, "Tell the goblins to reinforce the fence with iron bars. If another one slips out, I'll throw you all in there to feed the rest." By noon, Stone had missed breakfast. From his tent, he watched a river of greenskins at work, some hauling wood for racks, others molding clay, some leading goats to the slaughterhouse, and goblins twitching wine jars at the cellar. Nearly 3,000 greenskins lived in the tribe. Years of constant war, the mushroom field's fertility, new arrivals, and captured greenskins had swollen their numbers. With the outposts added in, the total neared 4,000. When the tribe had been small, a shout could rally everyone. Stone had once spent his days leading raids, then drinking by the fire at night. Now there were outposts to garrison, ores to hunt, wine to brew, goats to slaughter, beastmen to guard against, prisoners to train, and escaped squigs to track. He moved from dawn to dusk, constantly on his feet, often without a moment for wine. He felt a wariness, not the kind that a greenskin's body knew. Orcs could run 10 miles with a great axe without panting, but a mental tiredness. Leading a large tribe was more fatiguing than cutting down 10 wog-zagas. "When can I just sit and drink with a roasted goat?" he muttered, stroking Furball. The little beast rubbed against his hand as if to soothe him. In the mushroom tavern, Skinny Pole barked at Goblins' molding jars. Many collapsed into crooked lumps. Chubby paced the piles of iron bars while orc boys tried to lash together racks that looked likely to fall apart. Kez loaded night goblins for the Black Feather Forest. Death crawlers were strung with bows. Bone Tree roared at the new orc prisoners, making them run with stones on their backs. The whole tribe buzzed with preparation. Stone watched it all from the field and felt oddly alone. The wind brought the smell of roasting mushrooms and the sharp tang of mushroom wine. Stone inhaled, let it anchor him, and stood. No matter how tired he felt, the feast had to happen. His brother's recovery and happiness depended on it. As their boss, he'd hold on. "Furball, come on." He patted the squig's head. "Let's go check the slaughterhouse. Tell Bone Tree not to chop the goats too small. A whole roasted goat tastes best when roasted whole." Furball whimpered and trotted after him. From the distance came the goblins' shouts, the orc roars, and the squigs' high-pitched squeals. Stone looked over his tribe and let his lips curl into a slow smile. He was tired, but this was his tribe. 3,000 greenskins who followed him for food, for fighting, for life. A little wariness was nothing compared to that. At the feast, watching his brothers gnaw meat, drink hard spirits, fight, laugh, and make merry, all his fatigue would wash away.